Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode or lesson of the Salon of Classical Architecture in our third season. You remember the third season is dedicated to Spanish Islamic architecture. And today, according to our program, we're going to be talking about geometry and composition in Islamic architecture. And as part of the whole season, we're going to focus heavily on Western Islamic architecture, where we leave Eastern Islamic architecture for later in the year, which will be our season 4. So as usual, as a reminder, I mean, this we are like a sort of independent, but not so independent, um, entrepreneur associated with the Classic Planning Institute, the Classic Planning Academy, and the Traditional Architectural Group, because I am part of the three of them, and what I do here is also reflected in what they do there. But I wanted to create something that was separated to all of them, but at the same time linked so that they could also benefit from them. I mean, it's more traditional architectural group and classic planning academy, so it's an extension of both. It's part of the educational activities of the traditional architectural group, even if it is not exactly the traditional architectural group, because it's open to people outside UK. So this is our calendar. I'm bringing it especially for those of you who are here for the first time. I mean, remind to you that the two previous classes, as well as all the classes from the previous seasons, are uploaded in our YouTube channel. If you don't know about our YouTube channel, just text me and then I will send it to you. And if you're in our groups, you will see the recording, that the recording has been uploaded probably tomorrow or later on tonight. So this is a reminder. We are on the third lesson of the whole program of this season. We're going to be talking about geometry and composition in general. Next, in 2 weeks' time, we will be talking about Umayyad and Abbasids, and then we will focus for the rest of the season on Hispanic Islamic buildings, the Mosque of Cordoba, Madinat al-Sara, all the architectural production of the Taifas, the Moravids, and the Almohads, with a little bit of a focus on Morocco and Algeria. Then we come back to Spain with Alcázar of Sevilla, the Alhambra of Granada, and then to finalize with the Mudéjar. And then we'll see what happens in autumn. So today we're going to talk about geometry and composition in Islamic architecture, which I feel it's an interesting point. It, in general, I mean, as you know, this is going to be an introductory class to to geometry and proportion in Islamic architecture, because that's what the time that we have in the usual time that we allocate for these classes on the Salon. So we are not going to cover absolutely everything. So if you are going to tell me, oh, but the Cuba and the Sisa in Palermo follow a different system, yeah, I know, but I mean, we are going to focus on Hispanic Islamic architecture with hints here and there, or in Pakistan, in Iran, they use something different. We know, but this is what we're doing. We are not going to talk about measure units, because talking about measure units, it's as I said to someone who asked me in one of the groups, why aren't you focusing on that? Basically, because if you want to talk about geometry and proportion, yeah, it's true that we cannot separate these from the units that they were using, but the units themselves, once they need to be understood as a whole. If we start saying how the equivalence between the caliphal cubit and the metric system, we are losing. We have already lost the discourse. We're getting lost on the details, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So the first thing we need to consider in here is for this is the concept of exoticism, romanticism, and Orientalism in Hispanic Muslim architecture. No? The first thing that comes to our mind are like these exotic views with everyone dressed in Arab gowns. The Alhambra is like a paradise, and it's so nice. It's a feast for the senses. The water, the flowers, the smell, everything is it's all that. That's the voluptuous and the romantic character of Islamic architecture. And of course this is fed because actually they were very voluptuous time. They were very luxurious time. The Caliph of Cordoba was equal to the Emperor of Constantinople and the Emperor of Germany. So we are not talking about a small king in Spain. We're talking about one of the most powerful monarchs of the time. And then because of the links with all the Arab countries, all southern Spain or general Al-Andalus would benefit from trade. So some things that the Venetians and the Genovese would struggle to have deals with the Mamluks and the Egyptians and the Syrians, the traders from southern Spain, because they were part of the Ummah, part of the Brotherhood, would have that like a direct access. So that resulted in incredible levels of wealth and incredible levels of display of that wealth in the form of buildings. So part of that exoticism comes from the actual fact that, yeah, southern Spain, the Al-Andalus Caliphate was one of the most prosperous areas in Europe around the 10th century. And Cordoba was a rival only to Constantinople. So that also has to be very in mind that no other city in 10th century was equal to Cordoba in Western Europe. You have to go to Constantinople to compare. And as well with that comes obviously the idea of religion and the wars and the holy war, and that's why I brought this other painting, like the counterparts, no, the very exotic sensual counterpart, the luxurious counterpart, and then the religious counterpart. And I mean, this is like this is a painting from late 19th century depicting like an old Muslim cleric just blessing or encouraging the troops to go in the war against the Christian kingdoms in the north. We will be talking about that in due course. But there is actually like a whole literature about all the wars that were had between the Christians and the Muslim, the whole process of the Reconquista, so that cannot be avoided as well when considering the romantic vision of this, especially because at the end of the Reconquista, when Granada is recovered in a mix of war and political intrigues. And therefore, I mean, there is always the romantic vision of King Boabdil crying when he left Granada because he lost his kingdom, and then his mother telling him, "Cry as a woman, what you couldn't defend as a man." So there is all this narrative, and a lot of that actually doesn't come directly from Spain. A lot of the narrative, a lot of the idea and the vision that we have of Islamic architecture or about Islamic Spain in general comes from Washington Irving. Washington Irving was like a traveler, an erudite from the United States who traveled around Spain in the 1820s and was fascinated with Alhambra. And why was he fascinated with Alhambra? And why was in general all this fascination of European travelers only with Islamic monuments in Spain? The reason is because if you wanted to see Gothic cathedrals, you could see Gothic cathedrals everywhere. But only in Spain you could see an old mosque turned into a cathedral, which was the mosque of Cordoba. You could see Islamic palaces still in use where you could actually enter, which were the Alhambra and the Royal Alcazar of Sevilla. You could still see a lot of things that were unique in Western Europe. And at that time, if you wanted to see them anywhere else, you would risk a danger. You remember when 4 weeks ago, we were talking about Marcel de la Foix, his wife having to dress as a man, just to disguise in Persia, etc., and things like that. So it was like a quick approach to the Levant and to Orient without having to struggle with living in a country with a different religion. So that fueled an interest on anything Moorish in Spain. And this is why in this slide, I'm showing some watercolors that Owen Jones did for the Alhambra. And it's something that I'm calling getting lost into the details. I'm saying getting lost into the details because sometimes we think that these watercolors that Owen Jones did is like the only knowledge that we have about Alhambra. The only thing that we know about Alhambra is Owen Jones. Only Owen Jones talk about Alhambra, and that the only source to know is him. And Owen Jones, don't get me wrong, he published a magnificent book about Alhambra, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But when you take a look at that book, the book is an amazing display of engravings using the chromolithography, which was recently invented in the 1830s, 1840s. But there is very little explaining you how to trace that wonderful Lambert King arch. There isn't. And that's a fact. I mean, actually, Owen Jones wrote the Grammar of Ornament to explain how ornament is structured. So again, if you want to know about Owen Jones and ornament, you have to go to the Grammar of Ornament. And I'm saying all this because many times the first approach that we do to geometry and design in Islamic architecture is Owen Jones because he's the most famous, he's the most quoted. But Owen Jones is just showing us very pretty illustrations, and I don't want to diminish his work. He did an amazing work, And I'm going to tell you, if you want to go through that direction, which is the books of Owen Jones that you need to check, because he wrote very good books. But the Alhambra, specifically one his book about Alhambra, is a collection of very pretty printings that put Alhambra into context, put Alhambra into the international interest, boosted the protection of Alhambra precisely because Alhambra became so famous that people would go and start stealing things from Alhambra. So that put the Spanish authorities in alert to protect them. But for example, I mean, this is just a detail in this lambrequine that you can see. The intricacy of the detail ends up being Gothic because Owen Jones has to figure out things. And when you see all these arches that we see in this area, these are trefoil Gothic arches. They're slightly different than they are in reality, and we're going to see some of them in a moment. So bear that in mind. And I'm saying this because we're going to see other sources to understand geometry and composition in Islamic architecture that have superseded Alhambra. Some of them by Owen Jones himself. And again, I mean, you see everywhere on the internet courses on how to trace, discover the secrets of Islamic geometry, discover the sacred geometry behind Islamic design. And you get to do a lot of this. A lot of beautiful stars, beautiful intersection of stars, beautiful patterns, the star, the this, the that, but we're focusing only on ornament. We are not focused, these studies focus only on tracing this, the wonderful 12-point star, the wonderful 8-point, 10-point, 16-point star, 24-point star, and how is that applied onto the tiles. And you have wonderful courses everywhere. But if you do that course, you have a very clear understanding of how to design a wonderful Islamic pattern. Does it help you to design a Islamic, something bigger than Islamic panel? No. Does it teach you how to design a mosque according to the Islamic Ottoman tradition or according to the Islamic Spanish tradition? No, it doesn't. So that's what I mean. We cannot get lost into those details of just hyper focusing on the little ornament, hyper focusing on the tracing of the pattern, because then we're losing the whole view. It's like you have a leaf in front of you, and the leaf is preventing you to see the tree and the forest. Not only the tree, but also the forest. So that's what happens when we focus too much on that. But also another aspect, no? You go to the Alhambra, you see this, and then you start reading the poems, and all the sensuality, the beauty, the craft. No, but sometimes it's a word that just stays there as a something hierarchical and volatile, the craft. And how these people do this? Oh no, these people were just wake up one day and started to carve plaster like crazy, and then when they got tired, they started carving something else, etc. Because that's how the Middle Ages were, casual. People just do whatever they want, and just they're pretty things because they were very good. And actually, no. I mean, if you go even today, if you go to Morocco or you go to Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, all these artisans that still do all these, they do it in a very thorough way. Some of them are starting to use patterns and stencils, but that's normal because that's what everyone would do if they want to to speed up their work. But I mean, there is nothing random in here. Everything is perfectly carved, perfectly ordered. And that's something that, again, I mean, make us get lost into the detail. Oh, what's the proportion of this leaf? The curvature is the golden ratio. Sorry, I promise we weren't going to talk about the golden ratio, so don't blame me. But that's something that, again, we cannot get lost into the detail. It's something very important, a very important geometry hidden here. Even if we want to talk about the details, we have axis, we have symmetry, we have composition, and then we have a geometry that is framing everything, where everything gets built up, and then the details come in. It's very geometrical, and also this is rooted as well in the general philosophy, not only because in Islam traditionally you cannot represent human figure, you shouldn't represent anything natural. I mean, depending on how strict you are with that vision of not representing, you cannot represent human figures, you cannot represent animals, or you cannot represent plants. But this geometry is like an abstract version of a plan. And this doesn't only come from religion. We need to consider also the Neoplatonic substrate in which Islam emerges. Not because, as we were saying before, the Arab was specifically Neoplatonic, but once they started spreading, we are in a time around the Mediterranean and Europe in which Neoplatonism is taking shape, is taking strength. It's not the study of nature as it is, but the study of ideas. Then you have St. Augustine and other philosophy that are focusing more on the idea and the concept of a plant, the concept of a person, rather than the representation of a specific person. That would come later, precisely once the Christians are translating the Arab comments on Aristotle. That would generate their own problems within the Islamic culture, because precisely that interest of Aristotle in representing reality as it is. But said all this, we have been talking about the artisans, and because we hardly have, we don't have a proper text that explains how to do Islamic architecture. We don't have a Vitruvius, basically. And even if we could have a Vitruvius, Islamic architecture has evolved, as we were saying, through regions, to the point in which the Islamic architecture in Persia is not or very little related to the Islamic architecture in Spain. And the Ottoman architecture is probably very different to the Egyptian one, especially considering that we are talking about cultures or ethnicities that were a bit excluded among each other. Spain were the Umayyads, who could flee from the Abbasids. The Persians were Persians. The Ottomans were Ottomans, and the Egyptians, together with the Syrians and Arabs, they were Arabs. So there is still today there is like all these little tensions between one and another. And tell a Turkish that they're Arab and see what they say. Tell an Arab that they are Persian. Tell a Persian that they're Arab, etc., etc. So nobody likes that. I mean, I think it would be the same as if you tell a Japanese that they are Chinese, the Chinese that they're Japanese, or something very usual. You're Spanish and they tell you you're Italian. So, or vice versa. I mean, I don't know who, but, or even worse, Greek and told that you're Turkish. So that just to make things worse. But let's come back to the idea of the artisans. I have brought this one. They are Persian, by the way, they're Persians miniatures about a ruler visiting the works that are being done in his garden. And we can see it's a garden, as we were talking the other day when we were talking about the typology. It's a cross garden with the four rivers of the paradise, and you have there the ruler. And I want you to focus on one detail of this illustration. This gentleman. This gentleman is not carrying a tray with sweets or a tray with something for the ruler. This gentleman is carrying a grid paper. This gentleman is probably the architect or the landscaper. This person is an authority there. This person has designed everything, or if it's not design, it's like the site manager. He has a drawing on how the garden is going to look like, and that drawing is sitting on a gridded paper, on a graph paper. And some of you may have used this type of paper to draw. You probably know it. If you're old enough, you have used it. If not, you may have used it in high school. If not, you would have probably seen it somewhere. I'm sure you have. So, and this is a precedent of that graphed paper, because it's very easy to use, because the paper is regulated a certain amount of units. So you draw, you don't need a ruler, you just follow the grid. So we have a testimony that these people, they were not just mates doing things. They were doing something that was already planned. And that's very important. We also have books. In this case, this is a book called White Carpentry, Carpintería de lo Blanco y Tratado del Alarife. So it's like white carpentry and treatise on builders, because Alarife means builder. This was done by a gentleman at the beginning of 17th century called Diego López de Arenas. He was a master builder who was a master builder doing mudéjar coffer ceilings, which we will see at the end of this season. Why is important this? Because it's López de Arenas doesn't, you cannot say that López de Arena is like creating anything. López de Arena is compiling, that's what is called breve compendio, brief compilation on how to do things. He's gathering anything everything that he knows that will be useful for the others. And then, I mean, he said with the conclusion of the ruler of Nicolas Tartaglia, which is like some geometric rules to obtain points and elements within the tracing that he explains, and then another elements regarding geometry and the tips of the compass. Because Lopez de Arenas doesn't use a ruler. Lopez de Arenas uses a compass and a set square. And remember, and I'm saying that because the units were not really, well, they were not relevant. I'm not going to say important, but they were not relevant. The units were the framework in which you need to express yourself. But the important thing was the geometry and the proportion. And Diego Lopez de Arena says that in the prologue. But and we will talk about that later. But also we have studies that have gone beyond the system that Lopez de Arenas explains, and then they have realized that there is a relationship between all that, between the set square, between the triangle that results in that. And this is a very simple geometry. Once you start looking at it, all the modulation, it's independent of any divine ratio. If you take a look at this, we have a set of division that come from a square, and then they're giving me other ones. For example, in this reconstruction of the Salon Rico, of the whole of Abderrahman III, we have different positioning of the elements and the relationship between the rotated square. And this is very important to take into consideration the rotated square. We will talk at it at the end. So what I mean is that we have empirical knowledge and we have also scientific knowledge. So Lopez de Arenas that was giving us an empiric knowledge that if you read it very well and you analyze it, it turns into rules. And this one by Francisco Roldán from the University of Granada becomes a proper rule that can be exported. So today we're going to talk about sources to understand the geometry in Islamic architecture. And these sources can be divided into buildings, archive, articles, and monographs. Why? Because the first thing we need to do to understand the geometry of a building is have a building. I'm bringing this one, which is the Castillejo de Monteagudo in Murcia. It's like a Castillejo means a small castle. It's, as you see, it's a ruined castle, and as many fortresses in Islamic Spain, it started as a fortress, but then it ended up becoming a sort of a small palace. Why? Why this happened? Alhambra was the same. Why? Because once the territory is pacified, you don't need anymore the fortress, so you can use the fortress because it's higher, it has better views, fresher air. The fortress has been designed to support a siege, so it has a lot of water. So it's a sort of a small place to retire for the local rulers. So that's when they gone from Alcazabas to Alcazar. I think that in Arab you have the same word, Alcazar. I don't know if you have Alcazar, something similar to Alcazaba, but then you have Alcacir. But in Spanish, we make the distinction between Alcazaba, which is the fortress, and Alcazar, which is the palace. And usually all Alcázares were initially an Alcazaba, but not all Alcazabas go and turn into castle. So, for example, in Almeria, the Alcazaba was never turned into a palace. Was always it was always an Alcazaba. It was never an Alcazar. While in Sevilla, on the contrary, the palace was very quickly turned into the fort was very quickly turned into an Alcazar because it was it was equally difficult, equally easy to defend from any point of the city due to being in the middle of a plain. Medina Sahara is straight away an Alcazar, while others have that combined thing. So just bear in mind because I'm going to be referring to all of them in the future. But with this Castillejo, we can take a plan, we can measure the plan, and also we can extract the geometry from that plan. We can extract where the axes come from. We can extract the sequence of diagonals, a rotated polygon. There is always a rotated polygon, and how all the other elements are being defined by geometric system using diagonals. I don't know if today we have here, we're honored with Professor Pedro Palazzo. We are not, but Professor Pedro Palazzo did last December in Brazil a very interesting lecture when he was there in the summer school about how they were using the diagonals to determine intersection and points. Why? And the diagonal is a very good method to determine things. Why? Because it's a perfect intersection. You don't need to measure 3 or 2. You just know in the intersection with those two lines, that's where you have to go. No but, no if. So they are very good on that. So again, the buildings are a source to understand the geometry because you can do a reverse engineering from them. But there are others. The archives are very important. And nowadays, a lot of those archives are uploaded onto the internet. They are scanned. They have a massive amount of sources there for you to use and research. And usually, because they're public institutions, you can request things that they have in their deposits and they are not available yet. Because the whole objective, all these archives receive funds from the government to scan everything they have. And everyone is happy to do so because then normally when you go to an archive and you want to consult a document, you need to have a permission. You will be taken to a special room, you will be put gloves, they will ensure that your hands are always clean, you cannot have a drink, you can only use a pencil, you cannot even sharpen your pencil. Why? Because you're dealing with very delicate documents. And you have to go to the archive. So imagine that you are a researcher from the United States and you want to investigate in Alhambra, and you only have a week. And then you arrive and you start discovering things, but your time runs out. So, and you realize that you have only done 60% of your research. So by having all this scanned and uploaded onto servers or to the public, then they are preserving even more the documents because then they stay in the dedicated isolated vaults to keep being preserved. So that's very important. It's the same thing in UK. You can ask to be shown the drawings by Palladio, which are stored in the Victoria and Albert Museum, but normally they won't. So that's for you to take into consideration the importance of the archives. One of the biggest ones for Spain is the Alhambra. The Alhambra archive has a massive a set of resources where you can get drawings, plans, elevations, section, manuscripts of all kinds. I would say they are at the same level of the National Library or national libraries everywhere. Obviously, better related with Alhambra and with Granada in general, but very interesting. For example, all the drawings for the restoration of the Alhambra are there for anyone to check if they wanted to know what happened in a certain moment of the restoration. Another very good one is ArchNet, which is focused on, as a website focused on Islamic architecture in general. Very good, plenty of resources, plans, elevations, section of buildings, very good. Probably it's not as complete, it's not an archive of their own resources, it's just a gathering, it's sort of encyclopedia, but very, very good. And another one, of course, is the Victoria and Albert Museum. And here is myself doing like a quick research on Owen Jones Alhambra, and these are the drawings that appear. And this is what I was saying about getting lost into the details. One could enter into the archive and see all those wonderful watercolors that Owen Jones did. And you spend hours looking at them. Oh, the color. Oh, but are you learning how those ornaments are done, or are you just admiring a beautiful object? And this is something that I am putting the question on you as an audience. How do you, and we can discuss that at the end of the lecture, how do you approach inspiration? How do you approach geometry? How do you approach design? Do you just look at pretty things, or do you actually want to know how those pretty things are built? We have had several discussions on that in the past. Another one are articles. Nowadays, especially with a very thriving academic world, there is a lot of articles being written about everything. And there is why? Because people now they have to research. Before, people they were teaching and they were doing very long researches that would result in 1 or 2, 3 books published during the whole career. They would be really, really, really big books that would answer like the ultimate question on the topic. But now, because of the new academic system, the new systems that are being implemented, people have to research a lot, people have to publish a lot. So we have a lot of articles, and usually researchers, they choose a topic and then they go and exhaust it. And the difference is that in the past, they would exhaust it and then publish the results when the topic is exhausted. Now the topic gets exhausted and they keep publishing until there is no more to publish, and they will have to find another one. But that's a bit the difference. But in the on the good side means that all that is available on the internet, all that is there for you to read it. So you can go to many sites and read those articles. I mean, I'm putting this here one, which we are going to comment later on, which is about the proportional tracing of the plants, of the plant of the most of Cordoba between the 8th and 10th century. So we are not talking again about two people just putting columns together and then when shall we stop? Yeah, when they tell us to stop, we just stop putting columns. No, no, no. We're talking about people who had a plan on doing things. Or for example, this one, which has become a classic, is the cubit on the historiography, on the Arab historiography of the mosque of Cordoba. So this book is talking about the use of measurements called as cubit. And the whole article is like a warning on what can happen if you worry too much about the units. Oh no, the Arabs use the cubit, and then you start making your own movie about the cubit and humanity, etc. But then you forget that here we're talking about measurements. And then, I mean, the whole article is just, if you want to know about the cubit in Islamic architecture, you read this article and that's it, because it's very encyclopedic. On it, this Mr. Felix Hernandez got all the qubits that he found, all the sources that we found. He measured everything that was being measured, and he said, okay, this guy says that this length is 3 qubits. I have measured this; it's 5 meters. So the qubit in here is this. The qubit in here is that. And how does that help you? Yeah, to understand how much in centimeters is a qubit. But still, the important thing is that that element is 3 qubits, and then maybe at the side you have one, so you have 1, 3, 1. That's the important thing. So it's less about the qubit or the palm or the foot being a measure of human thing, and then we start ranting against the metric system and the modernist, which I know a lot of people like doing, no, but understanding that the important thing is the number 3, 4, 5. That's the important thing. The measure of the qubit is irrelevant because the metric system was invented after. When you read Serlio, when you read Palladio says this is Byzantine feet. Serlio said, I'm measuring in Byzantine feet, I'm measuring Bolognese feet, I'm measuring in Roman foot, for you to know, so that you know. And then yeah. So I'm saying this is 6 Roman foot. Don't mess up saying that I have told you Byzantine foot. But the important thing is the ratio 6:1. So that's what I'm saying, that talking about or getting lost onto the specifics of the units is not telling you much, because the important thing is to find the proportion. And this can be a problem if we're measuring, we're doing a survey, and we're going to talk about that. You measure now everything in metrics, and then nothing fits, and then say, okay, these guys didn't know what they were doing. This is all bullshit. Excuse my French. I shouldn't have said that, because then the algorithm is going to blame me. Apologies, Mr. Algorithm. I will sacrifice something to your god, and that's the problem. So you will get the those getting lost into the details, and you get a lot of articles on that, and I will talk about that later. Just let's finalize this. And the monographs, there is a lot of books, especially older books, like from the up to the early 2000s. This thing that now a researcher writes 20, 25 articles about a topic. Before, the 25 articles were not published until the researcher knew how to put them on a book, or even or not even that. For example, this book by Felix Hernandez Jimenez, which is one of the biggest scholars on Islamic architecture, was published after he died, gathering all his notes on the minaret of the Mosque of Cordoba. And we're going to talk about it. It's a very fascinating history. But also we have a very good one. This is a very big compilation, the Treatise on Hispanic Muslim Architecture by Basilio Pavón Maldonado. It is in 4 volumes, and basically contains, one of the best things that you have is that it contains everything that it was known up until it was published. So bear in mind the dates. So we have 1990, 1999, 2004, 2008. So all the information published up until then is contained in that book. So it's very good. if you are very interested in the topic, you purchase those four treatises. The amount of information is incredible. The amount of illustration is incredible. They're very small because he needed to put a lot. And that's something that you see when you read the article from this gentleman. He puts a lot of illustration, but they're all very tiny because he wants to put everything in there so that you know what they are and then you can go for them. Because this is the important thing of all these books. It's not the close knowledge that they have, it's the key that they're giving you. And this is something that you need to bear in mind. That's what they were saying, that looking at the watercolors by Owen Jones is just running in circles. Going to these sources is like, okay, you're telling me that the archers in the most of Cordoba, they have this proportion because this gentleman is saying this. And then you go to the gentleman. Okay, this guy is using J. Hambridge. So you know that it's already not useful. Oh, this guy is using, we're going to see the Cordoba proportion. Again, another useless thing. Oh, but this guy said that he has measured everything and he had put everything together. Okay, and he has no conclusion. That's the one. So we'll see that we need to run away from those telling you that this is the universal system. This is the answer to all your questions. No, the answer to all your questions aren't there. That person doesn't have the answer to all your questions. Maybe God has them, but not that person. And we also have another one that this is very interesting by Professor Basim Hakim. He has devoted all his life to study Islamic cities, to how they are. And if there's someone who can talk about how Islamic cities are planned, if there is any order within that chaos, because there is order in the chaos, this is this book by Basim Hakim and a lot of his articles. So I recommend you to read it. I know some of you have already read it. I mean, it's this little book. I'm going to start getting royalties. Very cheap to purchase on Amazon or anywhere. Very easy to read. So go for it. And it explains, I mean, it has the concept of the fitna and the thisa. It's very, very interesting and trying to check. I mean, then he's giving you modulations and many other things. So it's very good to understand. Now, what do you, the important thing of all this also, what do you do with this knowledge? Because this is how the traditional city has been built, a city where cars didn't exist. So we need to always to address the elephant in the room. How good or bad is the knowledge that we have? Is, for example, I say a lot that, I mean, they ask me, oh, which book shall I look for interior? Is there a book that tells me how to design a house? And I say, well, there is not. And if there is one, it's completely superseded because now we have TVs and bathrooms, which they didn't exist in the past. And I'm saying this because they are two elements that completely disrupt the traditional interior. We will talk about that later on. So we have our sources: building, archives, articles, and monographs. Now let's talk about the chronology of those sources. How this is an informal classification that they do on the chronology of the sources, that basically the historical sources, they are more empirical. They are basically gathering empirical knowledge. We have a date, 1787, and then we have what they call the modern sources that gather scientific knowledge. What's the difference? The historical sources basically tell you this is how we do things because this is the way they have always been done. Why? Because that's the way we do it. That's the way my master told me, and his master told him, and that's the way it is. And here I am telling you how to do it. While the modern sources will say, oh, this is the way that has been taught through generations. Actually, you know what? This is based on this. Or actually, you know what? No, it's not based on anything, but there is a mathematical relationship that is easy to remember. So that's what you need to bear in mind. So that's the two ways of interpreting it. One is just the first time the tradition is written to explain that this is what we have. And the other one is explaining why you have that if there is explanation. And 1787 is the year in which for the first time they do that in Islamic architecture. So let's take a quick look about those resources. So these historical sources, sometimes, again, coming back to what I said, they are in the buildings. For example, this one is like a tracing in plaster of an arch in Medina Sahara. This has now disappeared, doesn't exist anymore. I think it was destroyed in the Civil War, unfortunately. But through that picture, one architect that we're going to see now, Emilio Camps Cazorla, he just copied it on tracing paper and then started to find the geometrical relationship. And then what looks like a beautiful trefoil arch, all of a sudden, has a geometry that can be done. And has a geometry, and if it can be done, can be explained, and can be replicated. So this is a source for the buildings. This is another one. This is inside the one of the arc in the Holy Chamber in Oviedo. And again, it has like a tracing for something. It's a compass, very roughly done in the timber. But here you have a multifoil arch for you to trace. It's not perfect, but it's there. And this can be related to a lot of that here in England, in UK. You can see a couple of places where they have a still preserved, like there is a layer of plaster in a wall and the other places in the floor. And in the layer of plaster, there is still the tracings of some Gothic tracery. Because this is the way the master builders did it. So what is this demonstrating us? Is that these people, they had some methods. They had methods that were learned and went past generation after generation, but they were precise. This was not the idea of the artisan just having a tea, smoking a joint, and then having an idea. This is the idea of the modern artist. These were people, very serious people that knew what they were doing. So this is very important to consider. It's very important to know that we have these examples. I was talking about we don't have a treatise, but we have something like a treatise, even if it is not properly Islamic. At the end of the 4th century, a gentleman called Julian of Ascalon, who was living in Ascalon in current day Israel, he wrote a treatise. It was a treatise more on law. It was a treatise on urban law. He would be, like we could call nowadays, a planning officer. So Julian of Ascalon writes a book for planning officers, or to explain planning policies. But there, at the same time, he's telling us, oh, this window is very small because the window, in order for the window to be big enough, you have to do A, B, and C. And then people have said, okay, let's see if this happens. And they say, oh, no, we have this building, Julian of Ascalon wrote in 4th century. We have this building from 9th century. Actually, what Julian of Ascalon says in the treatise is still being done in 9th century. Actually, it's still being done in 13th. Actually, my uncle's house, who was built by my grandfather, points that still does what Julian of Ascalon is saying. So it's a practice that he's narrating that has been preserved. So this is a bit the difference between the empirical knowledge. So the master builder that house knew that this is the way to do. Probably he didn't know about Julian of Ascalon, probably had never read the treatise of Julian of Ascalon. But now we know that originates in Julian of Ascalon. And if we do all that reverse engineering, we are going to find a lot of connections with classical antiquity that they go far from just the formal thing. Bear this in mind for later. We're doing a jump. We're moving from late antiquity to early Renaissance. And we have two books from Francesco Pellegrino that I have brought here, even if there are a lot about ornaments. They are the two first books that start talking about arabesque. They're talking about Islamic patterns, Islamic ornaments to be applied on European ornament. He wrote this one, which is Livre de Mauresque, so very easy. And the other one, which I'm not going to read, this is for embroidery, so to design embroidery patterns based on arabesque. So they're the first time he doesn't explain you how to do them. He just gives you the design because, again, he knows that the artisans that will see this, they will know what to do. They will know how to do it. And this is something, again, that because we have now lost all that change of knowledge, we think that nothing makes sense, everything was random, because we don't have the artisans to interpret those designs. And that's very important. And that's why we think, oh no, these people, and because you don't have any knowledge, you see the artisan coming and doing, and in 10 minutes he has drawn that embroidery. This is an arcane thing, and we don't know about it, and it's just immemorial, the sacred geometry, the golden ratio, blah, blah, blah. Second time I mentioned the golden ratio. Apologies. I promise I wasn't going to do it. and still some of them are coming. I'm just joking. So yeah, so this is what you need to bear in mind on this. And then we come again to our friend Diego López de Arenas and his white carpentry. And I said, I mean, this is very important because he puts in writing his knowledge, and he explains that this is what he had been taught. And actually, there is a manuscript that is in Texas, but it was coming from the American Spain that is prior to Diego López de Arenas and has the same amount. Andrés de Vandelvira has a manuscript, again, late 16th century, that is very similar to what Diego López de Arenas is writing. So, meaning that what Diego López de Arenas is writing here is something that everyone knew. And he's just writing it to have it in writing, have it in a text, and to spread the knowledge. And again, I mean, here he explained you how to trace mukarnas in a way very similar. We will see later. Owen Jones will do it, even if Owen Jones probably never read Carpintería de lo Blanco, but they came to the same conclusions, and also how to structure the beams and the structure of a roof to house later on the elements. And if you're in London or if you ever come to London, there is now an extension of the Victorian Albert Museum in East London, which has a wonderful muted roof. And if you go there, the incredible thing is not only that you have a wonderful muted roof in London, is that because the way it is shown, you can go and see the inner structure. And that's very interesting for architects and carpenters because it's a very, very, very unique situation in which you can see all that, because normally those things are still on site. So you cannot just go and see the structure. So again, if you're in London or if you're going to the V&A or planning to come and have enough time, that's a good opportunity to understand the jar roofs very well. And again, he's giving us geometry. He's giving how to trace all the starry roofs. He goes from the general to the particular, but as you see, he's not getting lost in the detail. He's not writing you a manual on how to do the 8-point star. He's writing you a manual to write the structure in which later on you're going to insert the 8-point star. And one of the thing is an interesting thing, if you have the time to read it, is that he complains, he speaks to you. It can be very funny. He criticizes people who we don't know who they are. He doesn't say the names, but he calls some people lazy. He calls some students who don't know, etc. Or, for example, here he says, muchos maestros pasan por alto el saber montear un arco, el cual es de importancia. So many masters forget or dismiss the idea of knowing how to trace an arch, which is very important for the builders. So he's criticizing. It's very interesting. It's very fun. All these books, all these manuals are very fun because this is the only opportunity he had to express himself. All the rest, he was transmitting the knowledge. So they have, it's the same thing as if you read the first Spanish book on architecture, Medidas del Romano. There is a lot of that. It's much funnier because it's two people and they start to call them lazy, sloppy, etc., because they don't want to learn. It's very, very interesting. So, again, food for thoughts. And now we come to the big year, 1787. This is the year when the Arab Antiquities of Spain is published for the first time. It's published in Spain by Spanish people. By Spanish people coming from the Royal Academy. So they were very serious people. They were like the best people in Spain to do that. They were sent to do a survey of the most of Cordoba and the Alhambra because travelers around UK, they were deviating from the Grand Tour. They were starting to talk about it. And in Spain, they were saying, this has always been here. I mean, it's the Cathedral of Cordoba. It's that palace in Granada. What do you want to do about it? It's there. It's pretty. Yeah, we know we have a lot of pretty things here. So I say, okay, if these people are interested, maybe we should study them to see what happens. And then that's how it starts. No, I mean, I think that it is. Remember, we're in 1877. We're in the middle of neoclassicism. We're in the middle of the Illustration, and then all of a sudden, these people with enlightened mentalities, think about that. They are neoclassical architects. They're the best neoclassical architects in Spain. They go to the south, and they start measuring a building that they don't understand. They're trying to, or better say, I don't want to diminish them, a building that they don't understand yet. They want to understand that building. And they study both two, the most of Cordoba, the Cathedral of Cordoba, and the Alhambra of Granada. They are the two main monuments. Think that, for example, they don't go to the Alcazar of Sevilla. They are not analyzing Medina Sahara. Why? Medina Sahara was a ruin then. There was nothing there, it was just mounds. It was all covered. And the Royal Alcazar was Royal Palace. They couldn't enter, they couldn't publish for safety and privacy. They couldn't publish the plans of the Royal Palace. While the cathedral was public, and the Alhambra, despite being still a royal palace, was not in use. The Royal Alcazar was in use. One in 1787, but last time it was used from 1725 to 1730. The court lived in Sevilla for 5 years. And that's something that very few people in Spain know or talk about, that for 5 years in the 18th century, I think it was 1725 or 1730 or 1729 to 1734, something like that. They were there because King Philip V was in a depression, and the Queen, Elizabeth of Farnese, thought that it could be good to be in the south rather than in the north for her husband to take out the depression. So that was also, imagine again, all these people coming from France, from the flamboyant Baroque France, staying on the Islamic stances of the Alcazar might have been like very shocking for them, as it is for us when we go and see that. So one of the important things in here is that this is a floor plan from 1741 of the Cathedral of Cordoba. In here, it's a plan telling you where the chapels are, what everything is. There is very little that can tell us that this was Islamic mosque. It doesn't matter. I mean, to the eyes of Christian people, this was a cathedral. It didn't matter that it was a mosque before. The Muslims did the same in Hagia Sophia. It doesn't matter. Or they did the same with the Great Mosque of Damascus. So they didn't care about the fact that that was previously a mosque. They were using it as a cathedral, and they were seeing it as a cathedral. But nobody was questioning what was there before. It was a structure that was reused, reconverted, repurposed as a cathedral, and that's it. And was heavily altered, as we will see that when we talk about it. But here I'm bringing this drawing because for the first time, 1787, they dare to make a reconstruction of how the mosque was prior to all the Christian interventions. And this is very important because here we're talking about archaeology. We're not talking only about architecture, we're talking about archaeology. These people measured the plan, did a whole survey to measure it, to understand what every column was. They knew, because we have a historical sequence of all the interventions and extension of the mosque, and then they did a reverse engineering to see what everything was in the past. So this is very important, and we will talk about that later. And I'm going to show you that it's very important because we're going to see what happens when others, which were lost into the detail, lost into the romantic vision, they try to reconstruct it. Also, these sections of the mosque. And I mean, as we will talk about it, so that you know, I mean, the whole mosque was like a one level, single level, a double arcade. And then in the center, in 16th century, they implement a central altarpiece, if you want to say so, like a cross or like a choir, in mix of Gothic and Renaissance style, with a mix of the elements. No? You see, they still reuse some of the arcades as a support for it. But here, it's the first time they were drawing horseshoe arches. And the horseshoe arch is not classical. So these people with a neoclassical mentality have learned from Vignola, from Palladio, from the beautiful classical tradition, had to infront to something that wasn't looking classical. And they had to learn and understand it. So this was the first attempt in doing it in a scientific way, not in a romantic way. These drawings, they won't be imitated in almost 100 years. All the English, British, and French publication won't look at this. They will do their own views of how the building was looking and their own idealized views, and this is very important. And here is again, I mean, I put this is the reason why I put this on the mark in 1787. Why? Because it's the first time again that they are showing us the geometry of a horseshoe arch. It's an arch in Alhambra, And then it said arco construido según el método de los árabes. Arch built according to the Arab method. So again, these people measured the arch and ensured that they understood how the arch was composed. So it's the first time this was done. Whether it is right or not, it's irrelevant. The important thing is the first time we're doing it. And together, which I find it very important, very interesting, they try to do a reconstruction of the Alhambra. So as you can see, I mean, as you know, if you don't know now, you know, because I'm going to tell you, the Alhambra had a series of palaces built by the Nasrid, by the last dynasty, and then the Emperor Charles V, or Charles V of Germany, first of Spain, he built a palace. He ordered to build a palace there, which is what you can see at the bottom, with the square with the circle inside. And in order to do that, they had to demolish some part of the Alhambra, of the palaces. But at the same time, by doing that, it preserved the rest of the palace because it converted it into a sort of royal palace. And then again, these enlightened people, these neoclassical people, they did the measurement of the Alhambra and then they said, oh, if we have reconstructed the Mosque of Cordoba, why can't we reconstruct the Alhambra? And they do this. And then you can say, okay, fine, pretty. But again, you need to what we need to understand is what did they have in mind when they were restoring this. So this is the reconstruction, and this is the plan of the royal monastery of El Escorial, built by Philip II after the victory of San Quentin, as a monastery that was also acting as a palace. And the whole monastery is inspired in the idea of the grid because it's the monastery of St. Lawrence, and St. Lawrence was martyrdom over a grid. And at the same time, it's an ideal representation of the Temple of Solomon, according to some Renaissance scholars. So we have all of a sudden here a comparison that it's telling us a lot about the spirit of enlightenment, about the spirit of architecture in Spain. These people were not thinking on the tales of Alhambra, the princesses, the witches, and the geniuses. These people were not getting lost onto the poems that are written on the text. These people were not obsessed in the color palette, neither on the geometry of the tiles. They were interested in something more superior, which is understand how that was looking. This is what an architect does. This is proper architecture. And also the fact that they are linking it to El Escorial is not random. Whether they want it or not, whether it is actual or not, it isn't, because the Alhambra is 300 years before the Escorial. The important thing here is the symbolic value that they were linking with both buildings. They don't tell you in the text that they are doing that because it's the reconstruction of El Escorial. That's something that we observe afterwards. And it's very interesting to see that relationship because it's also telling us. I always say, I mean, sometimes as a joke, that there is a relationship between the Temple of Solomon and the Alhambra, because the Alhambra in 18th century was reconstructed to imitate the Escorial, and the Escorial was built as an idealization of the Temple of Solomon. And again, is the historical accuracy of this is irrelevant in here. What it is important is the symbolic framework that these people used. And only when you understand that symbolic framework is when you understand the principle of design. Not by drawing leaves, not by drawing volutes, not by drawing arabesque. It's by understanding what these people were looking and thinking in there. So that if there is something that you can get from this lecture, please get that. So now we're moving towards the modern sources. And I'm bringing one here. I told you that this is what happens when you start thinking about the romantic and you forget about the scientific. So this is 1815. This is James Cavanagh Murphy, a British that was traveling during the Napoleonic Wars. And then he does a reconstruction. He does his own reconstruction. He diminishes completely what the enlightened people did, what all the Spanish scholars did. And then he invents a new reconstruction of the mosque. You can see the differences. He creates two side chapels either side of the axis to the mihrab. And then he continues, he creates a wall where there was no wall. Where actually that wall should have been somewhere here, and we will talk about it when we see the most of Cordoba. But the funny thing is that this is, if you look at the plan on the left, this is the plan that is usually most shown. The wrong plan, done for the wrong reasons, have become the right source. And sometimes I have found scholars that diminish the plan done by the academics in 1787 and the plans done even by Christian Ewert in 20th century. Even Christian Ewert makes mistakes doing the plan because it's based on this. And then Ewert realizes about the changes. But this is very important for you to know and to understand that there can be mistakes. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Alhambra. And Owen Jones goes to Alhambra, he does the measurement, he publishes a lot about Alhambra. They're wonderful drawings, they're wonderful prints, because again, he's using the technique of the chromolithography. Chromolithography means that it's lithography in colors. So first of all, at the end of the 18th century, they invent a new technique in which you don't need to basically sculpt the drawing onto a copper plate. You can just draw the drawing on a stone, apply some substances, and then it gets printed. So then this makes the process much quicker. That's first the lithography, and then in the 1830s they made the chromolithography, so that then you just apply different layers of colors because the system is so easy that it can be used in that way. And also consider that it was like with a little bit of gold, so it was a very luxurious print. So nowadays we see these beautiful capitals. We love them. So nice, so beautiful, the Alhambra. Owen just doesn't tell you anything about how to trace them. They're there for you to admire. I mean, I'm sorry being harsh with this book, but they are there for you to look at them. That's the only thing you can do. You can copy them, but you cannot extract any system from there. There are other studies done late 20th century where they measure all the capitals and then they extract the proportions. And once you check that and you compare with the whole evolution of the capitals in Islamic Spain, you realize that these things that you are seeing there, guess what? They are composite capitals. The overall proportion of these is composite, whether you like it or not. We still have all these zigzag rounded are the acanthus leaf and then we have a massive abacus that has combined both the abacus and the volutes of the composite order. But the proportions are still there. 1,000 years of evolution. That's what has made. But again, I mean, if you read Owen Jones, this is just pretty things. And this is the difference. This is ornament, etc. This is why I say, okay, get the Alhambra by Owen Jones with care. You cannot just get crazy about it because you're just getting crazy about a pretty book. And you're getting crazy about an object, not about an idea. And architects will work with ideas. Settle this, the Alhambra was, the Owen Jones Alhambra was used to build an Alhambra, which was the Alhambra court in the Crystal Palace. You all know that the Crystal Palace was done for the exhibition of 1851 by Joseph Paxton. And then once the exhibition finished, they were wondering what to do with that massive building. What shall we do? They didn't want to keep it in Hyde Park, but they didn't want just to demolish and to lose it. I mean, people would want to do something with it. So they decided to take it out, to dismantle it, because the building was, that competition won because the building could be built very quickly because it was standardized. And they was built elsewhere in South London in a place called Sydenham. And then the whole Crystal Palace was redesigned as an educational space. And as part of that educational space, there were several courts that were supposed to represent a civilization. So you had the Egyptian court, the Assyrian court, the Greek court, the Roman court, and the Arab court. And the Arab or Alhambra court. So and then here, Owen Jones basically He did a free version of Alhambra. He knew a lot about Alhambra. He was the person who knew more about Alhambra in UK, so he could do whatever he wanted. But obviously, he knew he didn't have the budget, he didn't have the will, he didn't have the space to build the whole Alhambra. So what did he do? He got inspiration and he did a free version of the Courtyard of the Lions and other stances of the Alhambra. And this is very important because Owen Jones, who probably had a very good idea of how all this ornament, how all this composition works, uses all his knowledge to design something. And this is what actually we should look at. Not at the book, not at the pretty book about Alhambra, but about the book he wrote about how he designed this. Because he wrote a book about that, the Alhambra Court in the Crystal Palace. That's the important thing, because here Owen Jones did, as I said, a freestyle version of the Alhambra using everything, all the knowledge that he had. And then he also explains you how he designed every single thing, why everything is the way it is, why should is not any other way. And this is important because these are design decisions. Whether they are right or not, they are the design decisions that Owen Jones took, and if you don't have any other source, you can use them in a much better way than just looking at the pretty engravings of his Alhambra. So that's why this humble guide on a tourist attraction is all of a sudden more interesting than the whole monography about the original building. And Owen Jones give us a lot of details. How he called it the stalactite arches. We call them now mukarnas and lambrequins. So he's explaining you how he designed all that. He's going through a very similar system that Lopez de Arenas used, which is just a set of pieces that they just start putting together, and because they are like standardized, they end up fixing. And whenever it doesn't look right, it won't look right. So that's a bit. He treats it a bit of a kid's game. Well, this is correct, and this also follows a bit like Lopez Arenas was saying. There is also specific ways in which you can do it. You cannot do anything. But Owen Jones plays it in the way that you just put everything together and you will get these beautiful stalactite arches. But the truth is that in order to arrive to that system, a standardization had to be done, and we're going to talk about how that standardization was discovered. Our next step in this adventure of pretty drawings is Monumentos Arquitectónicos de España. So if Owen Jones Alhambra is, you can call it, I'm going to call it a 9 out of 10. Monumentos Arquitectónicos de España is a 1,000,000 over 10. It's an amazing publication, wanting to gather all the main monuments of Spain, done in 19th century. It was never published. And that, don't be sad because it was never published, because that means that all the engravings are lying down in the shop of the Royal Academy and can be yours for the super economic price of 300 euros. You can buy these pretty 19th century engravings for 300 euros in the shop of the National Academy of Spain. They're not cheap, but similar chromolithographies are thousands of pounds. Not these ones, because obviously these are cheap because the original source are still being sold cheap, because there is a lot, thousands of them, because remember, this was a book that was never published. So you can buy all of them very cheap. And now they're running out of them after 150 years, which is fair enough. But you are still on time to purchase them. And these are amazingly well done chromolithographies. They're much, much better than the ones in Alhambra. They're later, they're like around 30, 40 years later, so the technique had evolved. And this was done with a lot of care and a lot of support from the Spanish government and the Royal Academy. But again, these are just pretty things to look at. You cannot get principles of design from these ones. You cannot. And again, this is the difference. If we start looking, if you focus only on Monumentos Arquitectónicos de España, you're losing, you're missing something. These are pretty engravings, these are pretty prints to hang onto the wall of your house, but you cannot get knowledge from them, no matter how accurate they are, because they don't explain you anything. And here is the mihrab and one of the lateral arches. The amount of detail is exquisite, but again, you cannot use this because it's not telling you how it was designed. And what you need is that you need to know how things are designed. The same way that when Renaissance people measured the orders, they understood how they were done. This hasn't been done entirely on Islamic architecture, but we're going to see some of them. This one, for example. This is Ottoman architecture, l'architecture ottoman, or the Die Ottomanische Baukunst. Excuse my German, excuse my French. This is a book that was published in 1873 for the International Exhibition of Vienna of the same year. This was published, you see, like a work authorized by the Imperial Office. So this was authorized by the Ottoman Sultan to be published, a book about Ottoman architecture to be shown in that exhibition with a very political purpose. Remember that the Ottoman Empire was considered the sick man of Europe. And then what the Ottoman Empire is trying to show in that exhibition is that, hey, don't call me the sick man of Europe. I am a very advanced country. I am one of the most prosperous empires in Europe. I have my own architecture. And here is my book talking to you about my own architecture. And look, you said that you have your orders. We have our orders. And this is the really important thing of the book, is there are 10, 20 pages at the beginning. You can see them a little fainted there, which says Theory of Ottoman Architecture. And see the drawing. Here, I mean, this was done by two people, Pierre Launay and Pietro Montani. Pietro Montani is, when you look for him in Wikipedia and in Turkish, it's called Montani Effendi, Master Montani. Pietro Montani was a very, very important architect, and Marie Launay, Pierre-Marie Launay, were both of them very, very important architects of the Ottoman Empire. They got all the commissions, all the big commissions, and they knew a lot about Ottoman architecture. There is an article that is called actually Pietro Montani and the invention of the Ottoman style. So he invented the Ottoman style, both of them. And it is very important because he's putting elements of Ottoman architecture at the same height, the same importance of the classical orders. So this is not anymore a pretty thing done by a drunk artisan. No. This is something that these artisans know what they're doing. And look, this is based on the Corinthian capital. This is based on the composite capital. And if you take a look at it, I mean, the divisions on 4 parts is almost what you have in the Corinthian capital. So I don't know if any of you if we have today one of the students from the CPI. If you're here, hello, welcome to the Salon. But this is what we were doing last Thursday. We were doing the Corinthian portico. We were working on something similar to this in Corinthian order. So this is very important. Here you can see in a much better way theory dell'architettura ottomane. So theory of Ottoman architecture. So this is the real important thing of the book. And now we're coming to more important things. This is an architect called Ricardo Velázquez Bosco who did the first restoration of the mosque. What you see in black is the existing, what you see in red is what he did. So why is Ricardo Velázquez Bosco so important? Because he took the mosque as a very weathered monument and he restored it to its former glory, extracting the principles. So Velázquez Bosco did with the Mosque of Cordoba the same thing that Viollet-le-Duc did with Notre Dame, probably with the difference that Viollet-le-Duc and his school were looking to improve the monuments. I mean, this was happening end of 19th century, while Viollet-le-Duc started mid-19th century. Ricardo Velázquez Bosco only wants to bring the monument back as it was, not as it should have been, as it was. And this is important. This is an important difference. And if you want to know more, I mean, we will be having the Classic Planning Institute will be hosting seminars on architectural conservation. We will inform you very soon. But if you are interested, let me know through the group or through my email, and then I will put you in contact with Ms. Michelle Sovji, who is the person in charge of the seminars. But it will be very good. It's open to everyone. So this is what Ricardo Velázquez Bosco does. I mean, he would do the elevations as well. I think that he added, again, this is very quickly dismissed by all the modernists as, oh, pastiche. But no, I mean, he did an anastylosis. He didn't do a pastiche. And also, very important as well, is that when he's restoring one of the inscriptions, he mentions King Alfonso XIII as Caliph Alfonso XIII. So he was adding a note to contemporary times in his work. But this is not random. This is based on what he knew on other parts of the mosque. And this is the important thing. He's reconstructing things. He's giving things back as they were, not as they should have been. And this is a big difference between them. And here as well is the stages. To the left, you have the mosque as he found it. And we will be talking about this because the mosque of Cordoba had initially a timber roof, which was like a coffer ceiling, and timber planks. And that was removed in 16th century because the timbers were in very bad state, gradually removed and changed by plaster bolts. Then Ricardo Velázquez Bosco would reconstruct back the timber, would put back the flat timber ceiling, because we still preserve, we still have a lot of those beams that are now exposed in the courtyard, a lot of those beams. So we know how they were looking. So he struck the principles and he designed them, and then he adds a metal structure to substitute the Renaissance timber structure. And then in 1975, this would be done again to reinforce it with a little bit of unfortunate because they started putting some concrete beams, some concrete corbels, etc., that haven't worked very well, and they have to revert back to the original system done by Velázquez Bosco. So the what we have here is, I remind you, on the left, the Renaissance plaster bolts, on the center, the 19th century restoration, trying to do things as they were done in Arab times, and to the right, what it was done in 1975 to make things work. And also with this modernist approach of removing a lot of the ornament that Ricardo Velázquez Bosco did, and then just putting a much more simpler ceiling that was never there. But it was all this idea of purity, simplicity, etc. So it's just for you to know the stages. We're coming now to what it is the most important author we're going to see today, Emilio Camps Cazorla, who wrote a book. I mean, he had a very short life. He died at he was 48 or so. He left this book unfinished. Funny enough, or ironically enough, this book was published by his professor, who was 98-year old by the time the book was published. So this 98-year-old person, he reviewed the work of his pupil and then published it. So it's quite a task considering the age. So Camps Cazorla does an analysis of all the arches, of a series of arches in around Spain. Most of them are in Cordoba because he's focusing on the Caliphal period. So he starts from 1711 up to 1033, which is when the Caliphate collapses. But he also goes a little bit before, a little bit after. So he has the bulk of his arches are in Cordoba, Medina Sahara, 20 arches. Then he has 6 arches from prior Visigoth times. Then he has 1 arch in Oviedo, which is more or less contemporary to the Cordoba ones. 2 arches in Cordoba, which are later. 1 arch in Malaga, 1 arch in Granada, the 3 of them later. So blue means before, red means contemporary to the Caliphal Cordoba, and the other colors means after. Purple means the immediate year, the immediate century, the Taifa kingdoms, and green means the Nasrid. So he analyzes all those arches. Most of his focus is in the Mosque of Cordoba, where you see all the arches that he analyzes. And then he does all out of a survey, he does an elevation of them, analyzing what everything should sit. And this is the important thing. We're not talking here about how many foot, how many modules. He's just going geometry, pure structure. And then he starts finding relationships. He starts finding what every arch is centered. He starts finding what the relationship between all the voussoirs are. So he's creating a very, very thorough, methodical definition. And the key point that he says is that the whole sequence of the arches in Islamic Spain is related to the position of the center of the arch, meaning that the Caliphal arch you could inscribe an equilateral triangle inside. That was, let's call perfect, no? That was the canon. And then in prior times, the triangle would get more and more pointy until it's too pointy, and then it starts creating like pointed horseshoe arch much later on, and we will talk about that in due course. He's also analyzing the very complex arcades around the Maxura, around the Mirab of the Mosque of Cordoba. And these are drawings that I did myself based on his book. So I have the book here. So we are not talking about arcane knowledge. This is the book. Let me show you some of the illustrations. So he's showing you these are Visigoth arches, how they are traced, and then he moves towards more complex arches in the Mosque of Cordoba. He measured them. He finds a relationship on them. He's very much aware that all these arches, they are 1,000 years old. They have been subject of deformations. There have been two massive earthquakes in the Iberian Peninsula that have affected the Mosque of Cordoba. There was one around year 800 that affected half of the mosque. And then there was one in 1369 and one in 1755. Those two earthquakes affected severely a lot of buildings in Spain. It was not as destructive as it happened in Lisbon, but all that has affected and created big deformations in the structure. So Camps Cazorla decides to not to obviate, but to reconstruct and to virtually reconstruct, virtually recolocate and realign all the points and see what happens. And I'm insistent on this because obviously he's not doing what he was saying. He's just bringing back the alignments what they should have been. And this is important because we will see now what others have said about that. And again, this is a detail. So what I want you to say is that if you have Camps Cazorla's book, you can draw all this. So then therefore and he starts setting a system. I mean, the book is a bit incomplete because obviously he could only analyze one period. For him, the really important thing, as you can see here, is the equilateral triangle. That's what defines the whole modulation of the caliphal system. There is always an equilateral triangle involved in all the tracings. And once we start moving towards later, the triangle starts getting more pointy until it gets too pointy, which is when the pointed horseshoe arch appears. So this is very important that you take that because this is the geometry on which everything is built. And Rafael Manzano Martos, for example, would use in his works a lot of Emilio Camps Cazorla. We have been talking before about Felix Hernandez, and this is, as I was saying, this is a book that was published at the end of after he died. It's a posthumous book gathering all his notes because Felix Hernandez was like an amazing scholar who never published anything. He was just silent worker, silent restorer, the silent restorer of the Mosque of Cordoba, silent restorer of Medina Sahara, silent restorer of the whole city of Cordoba, massive amount of knowledge, never published anything, or hardly published anything. And he was a very cryptic person. Even when you read, you can see that he knows more, way much more than what he was talking to you about, as opposed to other books that you have the feeling that the author doesn't know what they're talking about. You know that we'll talk about that one that is still in front of the Saracens. When you read that book, you know that you are just in front of a hyper excited person that has gone to the Middle East for the first time and is fascinated with the Middle East people. I was going to say Middle East men because why not? And then yeah. And then she wrote a very excited book saying that the Crusaders stole everything from the Saracens, and seems that she has a big in Spain or things like that. So, so be aware of all these overexcited books. We're going to see another one today. So the important thing is Felix Hernandez spends his whole life restoring the Mosque of Cordoba. The Mosque of Cordoba had a minaret. The minaret was in terrible condition in the 16th century, but it was still stable enough not to demolish it. So what do? They built another tower around. They built a Renaissance tower around that hide the minaret, but then protected all the caliphal construction. And this caliphal construction is inspired, I mean, we talked about this the other day, the minaret of the Mosque of Cordoba of the Rahman III, Felix Hernandez, theorized that it is inspired in the minaret of the Mosque of Kairouan, which you can see here. And we know as well that the minaret of the Mosque of Kairouan is linked, is inspired in whatever the pharaohs of Alexandria, the light of Alexandria, was looking on the 8th century. So, and then the minaret of Cordoba is done based on that. This is the reconstruction that he does. And here you can see 3 arrows in 3 colors. We have in blue the original minaret of the Mosque of Cordoba, and then this influence goes to the south, to the Mosque of Hassan and the Mosque of Kutubiyya. And then from there goes to the Giralda. But also you have the orange point, and it's in the Pyrenees, because Felix Hernandez discovered a relationship between the proportions of the belfries of the Catalonian churches in the Pyrenees and the minaret of the Mosque of Cordoba, which is a bit controversial because the proportions are there, but we know that the builders were Italians. So there is a very interesting mix in there, how these Italian people built that. Well, they had a known knowledge. So it's very interesting. Felix Hernandez doesn't mention it in his book. He just put there the facts. No, I have analyzed this. The proportions are the same, but we also know that the builders are from Lombardy. I don't know what to do with this, but here is for you to do whatever you want with them. So it's a very interesting fact. But then obviously the Giralda of Sevilla, which is the final stop in all this evolution of the minaret of Cordoba and the lighthouse of Alexandria. Again, here we have like a connection, not only with the lighthouse of Alexandria, the Giralda, the now belfry of the Cathedral of Sevilla, the importance of it, but also the importance of the Giralda all over the world. There is a copy of the Giralda in Kansas City, and there was a copy of the Giralda in New York, in Madison Square Gardens by McKean, Met and White. They did their own copy version of the Giralda. You can see that they copied mostly the upper part, not the central part with the Segba panels in brick. But Manhattan had its own Giralda. So, and here we have this connection. We have the connection between the Temple of Solomon and the Alhambra, the symbolic connection, and then we have here a symbolic connection between the Lighthouse of Alexandria and the Giralda of Sevilla, and the Madison Square Gardens in New York via the Giralda of Sevilla, the minaret of the Mosque of Cordoba, and the minaret of Kairouan. So that you see that sometimes it's not about the stealing, it's about things that progress and evolve on their own. It's like when you see the capitals of Alhambra, you are not seeing something tan pretty. You're seeing a composite capital that has been evolved on its own, isolated by itself. It's like the birds that Darwin analyzed in the islands, where each of them had evolved to occupy a niche. So it's sort of isolated evolution. Before we continue, I think that we need to make a stop here with this monumental book called Early Muslim Architecture by Creswell in two volumes. One covers the Umayyads and the other covers the early Abbasids, the Umayyads of Cordoba, Aghlabids, Tulunids, and Samanids. So basically up to the 10th century, beginning of 11th century, there are said that it stops at year 905. And you can see as well the contributors. So we have our friend Felix Hernandez. He wrote all the part about Spain. So that's why I remember the first time I read this book, I said, I have read all these, because it was Felix Hernandez and Leopoldo Torres Balbás who gave him the introduction. It's not that he's stealing them, he quotes them. I mean, he's a British gentleman, he honors them. It's a monumental book. It's very difficult to get. It's a very limited edition. It was done mostly for King Farouk of Egypt and his entourage. But he did like a very short edition called Short Account on Islamic Architecture, which you can see here. And this one you can buy at a very reasonable price. And there is another edition with a hard cover, etc. And the good thing of this book is the drawings. Probably this is one of the most remarkable drawings that is reproduced everywhere, is the axonometry of the most of the Dome of the Rock. But I mean, it has plenty of very good illustrations. For example, this one showing you the most of Damascus when it was a temple, or this, or some of the palaces in the desert of Jordania. And this is only this is just the summarized edition. I'm trying to see. This is the most of Samara. So you have, and what's the advantage of this? I mean, the good thing of this is that these are proper survey drawings. So these are very, very, even to Lumos in Cairo, etc. So these are very accurate drawings that are still nowadays being used. So again, if you want to learn from plans, elevations, and sections, go to Creswell. You can find it online in archive.org and Hathi Foundation. Go to them, see those plans, get those plans, because they're the most accurate plans in many cases that you can get now with all the laser um, elevations. Now that's getting a little bit superseded, but they are very, very accurate. And also the difference is that these drawings, they show the information you need to have at the scale you're looking at them. While all these laser surveys, they just show all the layers of the DWG in a very small paper, so you just see a black dot. And to start wrapping up, where I have brought this book is crucially important by Michel Ecochard, which is called Relationship of Monuments, Greek, Byzantine, and Islamic, a Question of Geometry. He's giving you the spoiler here already. So Ecochard here, he was an architect who was initially in Syria and then moved to Morocco. He did a lot of things in French Morocco. And based on all the knowledge that he got, he published this book. He does an analysis of all the main of the study. I mean, this is the area of the study goes from Aachen to Jerusalem, from Armenia to Spain, to analyze mostly octagonal structures. He started studying, he measured them. This is San Simeon, the Estelite monastery. He started doing very, very thorough surveys, and he started comparing the geometry of all the octagonal buildings. And obviously, an octagon is a rotation of two squares. So an ecochart start finding that obviously all these octagons, they are rotating the two squares, and they are using always the same intersection, because at the end of the day, it's a very basic given geometry and it's easy to achieve. But then ecochart says, why all these people are rotating the polygon exactly in the same way? One question, one modernist would say, because it's the only geometrical possible way. But what happens when you start rotate them more to get more columns? And Ecochard started to discover that in many cases, all these triangulations, all these little peaks, all these little mukarnas, the points coincide with the rotation of polygons that Vitruvius described to define the entrances of the Greek and Roman theater. Vitruvius talks you about the Greek theater and the Roman theater and how you determine the accesses by rotating polygons. So obviously, this means that the people who did this were rotating polygons in the same way Vitruvius did. So what do we do with this? We're rotating polygons according to Vitruvius, but we're not doing Roman theaters. We're not doing the Greek theater. We're doing mukarnas. What the Cochard says is that at some point in history, some master builders had in their minds the theories of Vitruvius according to the rotating polygons. And that specific portion, extremely specific portion of knowledge has continued over the years. And this is very important because it's the only link, only documented link with classical antiquity that we have, with classical architecture, with the theory of classical architecture. We know that the capitals that we see in Alhambra evolved from the composite capital. We know you can trace the difference, but we don't have any source explaining you how that is done. We don't have doing about Arabic and Al Vitruvius. We don't have that. We don't have an Vitruvius, the same way that, that we had the Almagesto for Ptolemy. We don't have that. We don't have an Arab version of Vitruvius. This is the closest thing to a Middle East Vitruvius that we have. One day, we might find an Arab copy of Vitruvius. Who knows? It might be in a cave in Qumran, the same way they discovered the manuscript. It might be in one of the uncatalogued libraries in Timbuktu or in Ethiopia. Or it might be a copy in Santa Catherine Monastery because nobody knows what is there. Still, they don't know what is inside there because every time they go, they find more books. It could be in the Vatican Library and nobody has taken care of it. And so on and so on. It could be in Pompeii. Well, it's difficult, it is in Pompeii. Sorry. But you never know where you can find it. So, but until then, this is the only resource that we have that is connecting, the only clue that we have about it. What can you do with it? Mukarnas. That's what you can do. Instead of using Owen Jones' method, you can rotate your polygons and get much more interesting Mukarnas than the ones that the toy game that Owen Jones was telling you. Because this is actually how the artisans do them nowadays. So this is what I was telling about how to find the scientific justification of the empirical knowledge. You go to your artisan in Egypt, you go to your artisan in Iraq, they're tracing your beautiful Mukarnas. This is the way my masters told me. And this is the way my masters told him, and so on. But these people, all that knowledge come from a source. And Ecochart identified it with that. Whether it is true or not, or it was just one day a Habibi who decided to rotate polygons, could be. But si non è vero, è ben trovato. And now we're coming, and I have to apologize. I know that I told you that I wasn't going to talk about the golden ratio. I'm not going to talk about the golden ratio. I'm going to talk about something even better. The Cordoba proportion. If you have seen the Ancient Aliens, if you have seen the golden ratio applied to Donald Trump's hairstyle, that's nothing compared to the Cordoba proportion. This is incredibly wrong, but it is there, and you cannot say, I hope there is no one from Cordoba here, because I know that you guys will kill me saying this, because Rafael de la Hoz is a god in Cordoba, but I'm sorry for that, but this is worse than the Ancient Aliens. The Ancient Aliens look like an academic serious theory compared with what Rafael de la Hoz is saying in this book. And the funny thing is that the regional government has imported it as a way of knowledge. It's official knowledge blessed by the government, and the book is... There is a very similarity. This is a resume. I drew the regulating tracings from the modes of Cordoba, the way that Rafael de la Hoz says, I superimpose them with the plan, and there is no coincidence. They are just there. Some of them are there because obviously if you start tracing lines, at some point they intersect, and voila. So they don't correspond with the plan. They get there, but it's like, where are you taking the points? Are you taking them in the wall, inner wall, outside wall? He's not telling you. He's just saying this is the system, which has been saying the octagon, because I went, and this is real. He went one day to a primary school. He told the kids to draw a rectangle. All the kids drew the same rectangle, and they said, oh, this is the Cordoba proportion. This is immanent knowledge inserted in the people of Cordoba that has been preserved for millennia in the minds of the kids. You do whatever you want with the knowledge. That's what I mean, that the Ancient Aliens actually look serious compared to this. And he starts putting again this, where the tracing fits, the tracing fits. And then he starts saying, this is the Cordoba rectangle. This is the man of Leonardo. This is Le Corbusier. So this is not only measuring Le Corbusier, but also linking everything. So we're linking the rectangles that some kids have drawn, the octagon, Vitruvius Man, Le Corbusier, and some sculptures in a Roman sarcophagus in the Museum of Cordoba. But not only that, that rectangle is the shape that the tower of the cathedral, that the minaret that was reformed in the Renaissance is casting over the ground. He doesn't tell you which day, he tells you 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock of, okay. So we have kids drawing a rectangle. We have the modular. We have the perfect recipe of a disaster. And then to justify that, we have a monument that was built in the 9th century, heavily refurbished in 16th century, heavily refurbished in 18th century, and the shadow that is casting is exactly the same proportion. But it's not only there. The pyramids as well. They are from Cordoba. They were guys from Cordoba. Forget about the ancient aliens. They were people from Cordoba. They were Cordobese doing that. You go to America. Forget about the conquistadors. Well, I mean, they were Spanish. Forget about them. They were not Basque people who were the only ones having the Hidalgo University. They were people from Cordoba. The Preincaik people, forget about them. Cordoba people, the Hombre de Tolina, Cordoba. And even, of course, Cordoba in Argentina. Who could be? People from Cordoba. Cesar Pelli, Cordoba. Teotihuacan, Cordoba. Everything is Cordoba. So it can only get better. And that's where he ends up. So this is as crazy as it gets. So I said that I wasn't going to go to talk about the golden ratio because this is even better than the golden ratio. You have to admit that the Cordoba proportion is like something in another division. And I know that a lot of people will kill me listening to me what I'm saying, attacking one of the gods of modernist architecture in Spain. But that's how it is. I mean, this is the extremes that the Cordoba proportion goes. So be careful when you read it, or if you read it, have a good laugh about it, because I would say that at the end of the day, Rafael de la Hoz did that with good intention. But the grounds of hell are paved with good intentions. And he wasn't a bad man after all. He did a beautiful. He knew the most of Cordoba very well, like all the modernists do. Remember that modernists don't hate history; they love history. He wrote this wonderful book about the most of Cordoba with wonderful drawings. I don't know if I'm going to be able to open them properly because they are very long display. Here it is. Really beautiful sections. Really, really well documented. These are the best sections drawn till now. Well, until they did the survey of the most of Cordoba by DWG. So he wasn't a bad man. I mean, remember, and I'm saying this, remember always that the modernists they know a lot of history. Don't think that they don't know history. They know a lot. So if you want to oppose them, you have to be smarter than them. Just to finalize and to wrap up, because I think that this one is going a bit long and we still have the question. I know that you guys are writing, having a parallel discussion, which I haven't read. This is Antonio Fernandez Puertas that has started to analyze the measurements of the Mons of Cordoba in the light of another geometric standard. Looks very reasonable, no? He's just measuring, okay, the initial Mons of Cordoba was a square divided into two, which is obvious when you see it. Then the square root of 2 was the extension of Diet de Raman I, which we don't know very much what it ends, but there it goes. Then there was a square root of 3 for the other extension. Then there was a square root of 4 at 30 degrees to do the final one, and then two other ones at 30 degrees. So it's a very geometric method to design it. And he applies a similar one for the arcades. He applies a similar one for all the elements of the Mons of Cordoba. The good thing is that all of them are sort of independent. So they look very reasonable, they look very geometrical, and he's not doing a one modulation fits all. He's just saying different situations require different approaches, and this is how geometrically they approach it. The only problem, I mean, it looks very reasonable. The measures more or less fit, which is good, but they look similarly close to the dynamic symmetry of J. Hambridge. And that makes me suspicious about the real accuracy or not. But Fernandez Puertas doesn't mention J. Hambridge or doesn't mention him much in his studies. So this is one of the cases in which is suspicious, but not very suspicious, because the problem of all this is that Jay Hambidge is in between the fanatics of the golden ratio and Le Corbusier with the modular. He's part of all these readings that Le Corbusier was reading based on overexcited people reading Hambidge and Luca Pacioli, and then all the debate about the Cathedral of Trondheim by with Makodi Lund, which is very interesting on itself. So handle with care, handle with care. But it's very interesting and it works. So unlike the golden ratio and others and the Cordova proportion, this system works. So, but also remember that there is a lot of ways of saying one number. So if I want to express number 4, I can say 2 by 2, 3 by 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, a square root of 16, 8 divided by 2, etc. So it can be convergent evolution, and it can be all right. So let's have the benefit of the doubt, and let's assume that Jay Hambidge was, as he was, well-intentioned, but they all were well-intentioned. So handle with care this type of studies. And then, I mean, I feel, despite this, it looks a bit, I mean, he gives a name very poetic, the sacred square to his theories. But Francisco Roldan has done a very thorough analysis of the system that he's proposing. It's based on Diego López de Arena, so he's like translating the knowledge that Diego López de Arena had in 17th century, which everyone knows, including Diego López de Arena, that this is coming from the Arabs. And he extracted on a modulation that then complies with many Islamic buildings once you properly scale them. So it's very interesting. He's not talking to you about this is my system, this is my unit that everyone is doing. No, this is a modular system that then can get subdivided in a very easy way, because it's the ways in which a carpenter would work, usually in squares of 45 degrees. So I would say that si non è vero, è ben trovato. So if it is not good, it's well demonstrated. So it also matches very well with the classical systems of measuring unit by unit. Rather than massive geometric complicated constructions, we're going for simple ones, which is the way we know that floor plans work and many elevations did. So this is something to handle with care. And just to finalize, I hope that you have enjoyed all this. We haven't finalized, but we're starting to finalize. You have to be aware, some conclusions and some warnings. Universal system based on complex geometry should raise your suspicion. If it is too good to be true, it's probably not true. Traces must be simple. The simpler the trace, the more close it will be to be accurate. On that regard, accurate surveys are necessary, and we're going to talk about the accurate surveys before we leave. Geometry, space, and ornament must be understood as a whole. You cannot just get on the overall geometry. You cannot get on the spatial filling. You cannot get down to the ornament and just start looking with a lens onto the ornament. You have to think about a whole. At the same time, it is difficult to talk about modules and proportion in an architecture that doesn't have a solid theoretical basis. And what I mean solid theoretical basis is that we know that this architecture was just done. Very few people have worried on doing a theory of Islamic architecture. The attempts have been done going through the poetics, or have been done going through the geometry to identify with classical, which to a certain extent is correct, but to the others, it's you cannot just have 5 orders of Islamic architecture. You cannot have that. And also, the cultural differences are so vast that what is valid for Persia might not be valid for Egypt, might not be valid for Spain, might not be valid for Turkey, just to mention 4 focus. So it is very important or Syria. So it is very important to consider all that. So there might be relationships between Persia and India, Persia and Turkey, Persia and Egypt and Spain, but it will be difficult to have something that fits all. So we need to bear that in mind when we're trying to find, and there is no universal modulus and proportion. but there are local modulus and proportion that we can learn from the empiric tradition. We know, because that's an historical fact, that Vitruvius and other authors may have influenced the Islamic architecture as well as they did with Muslim science. So we know that Ptolemy, Aristotle, Hippocrates, Galenus, all that had an influence in Islamic science. Probably there was an influence, theoretical influence. Whatever theoretical framework outside Vitruvius was in classical antiquity, it probably influenced Islamic. To which extent, we don't know, but there was an influence. We know because Camps Cazorla proved the efficiency of empiric research. So he wasn't looking for a theory, he was measuring everything and then extracted a principle. The equilateral triangle as a module for the caliphal arches. And then from there, you have different modulation systems, which he only outlines based on number 3. And then with EcoChart, we have a direct connection to relate both classical antiquity and Muslim architecture. This is very important as well. So we have a framework that is giving us everything. And before we finish, a reflection on the surveys. Nowadays, we have very extremely accurate surveys that can identify every single element. You don't need to measure them manually. You have a laser that tells you everything where it is. Everything where it is at the moment of the survey, in the case of the Mosque of Cordoba, after 1,300 years, 2 massive earthquakes, fires, problems with foundations, lots of things. So we need to understand that these surveys are accurate, but if we cannot find, because the interest of this article is that it concludes in a very abrupt way that the proportional systems, it's abrupt but very neutral. But that neutrality has a very dangerous conclusion. He says that because of the deformations of the Mosque of Cordoba, we cannot prove that neither of the systems, not Camps Cazorla, not Fernandez Puertas, of course not Rafael de la Hoz, but none of the 3 can be demonstrated. And the problem is that in many cases, even that's the official conclusion, what comes after is that don't even bother. It's like the modernist addenda. Don't even bother in understanding that. It's pointless, worthless. Why are you going to do it? Its history doesn't have any use other than just admiring it and trying to preserve it. And if it fails, don't worry, we will build something modernist on top. That's the whole thing that comes with reflections like that. It's the same thing when they were starting to study the Parthenon in Greece. They said that because of the explosion in 1685, because of earthquakes, because the own deformation of the terrain, it is impossible to determine if the correct alignment of all the elements of the Parthenon, starting with the famous ocular deformation, because we don't know if that ocular deformation is due to it was done on purpose or if it is done due to deformations. We cannot prove that. But the problem is that a lot of people have got those conclusions, which actually come from the most accurate version of the survey of the Parthenon, done in the late 19th century, that wasn't superseded until they did the digital surveys at the beginning of 21st century. That has been an argument used by the modernists to discourage people to study this. Don't study. You cannot learn it from the deformations. And if you realign it, you are being fake. And that's the worst insult that you can tell that a modernist can throw onto you. You are fake. You are not being authentic. It's better to live in the ignorance for the modernist mindset. It's better to live in the ignorance and tell you that that you cannot know, and because you cannot know, there isn't any modulation. It's just Habibis putting stones together. It's better for the modernist mindset to say that than to admit that if you realign things, you're going to find a proportion. And that's the end of the lecture. A conviction rather than a suspicion is in the origins of this work, of Camps Cazorla's work. Composition in Western Muslim architecture, considering all its functional and decorative aspects, cannot only obey a roughly fantastic caprice. It should have its own laws. And if regarding to those laws, we have no other evidence that monuments themselves is meticulous and objective analysis could make us discover their essential rules. And that's the way to approach geometry and composition in Islamic architecture. Thank you very much. I hope that you have enjoyed the lecture. I'm going to start with the question and answers, and I'm going to read the comments because you guys have been having a good chat. So we have here, oh, okay, okay, so I thought that, yeah, Córdoba, capital del mundo. The Great Wall was built by people from Cordoba, of course. No, it had the Cordoba proportion, so forget about that. Göbekli Tepe was built by Cordobese, of course. So that's the idea. No, I mean, that's forget about what the Germans are saying about Göbekli Tepe. It was built by Cordobese people doing the Cordoba proportion. Cordoba didn't exist, but doesn't matter. It's Cordoba Tepe. Anyway, do you have any questions? Or does anyone want to bring a project? Any critique? I know today we have gone a little longer. I think I have got overexcited with the topic because I love it. So does any of you have any question? Now you can unmute yourselves and we can
You
see.
mentioned something about the road to hell being paved in some way. Was that also paved by the Cordobese?
Of course it was. With bricks with the Cordoba proportion. So forget that the hell is paved with bricks in Cordoba proportion. No, don't forget that. How much Louis Sullivan knew about this? I think that Louis Sullivan probably knew a lot through English publications. So probably Sullivan, of course, had the Grammar of Ornament, of course, had some relationship with one of Owen Jones' books. But Sullivan had the approach through the study of ornament, probably, because probably he had maybe, I mean, I don't know because I don't know what Sullivan did have in his library, but I'm sure that the Grammar of Ornament was there. Maybe the Manual of Ornamentation by Meyer, if not those very similar books, maybe L'Ornament Polychrome by Racinet. So he was probably very much aware of the arabesque, plus probably all the French books, because when we will be talking about the revivals later on, the revivals have five pillars. The Orientalist revival. One is Spanish architecture with Alhambra and the Mosque of Cordoba, the Alhambra in first instance, and then the rest of the buildings. Then you have Egypt, which is through Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, which was a monumental work in 20 volumes. Then we have Persia, with among others the books that we saw from Marcel de la Foix. We have the Ottoman architecture through Victor Marie Leonet and Pietro Montani, which is through the Ottoman architecture, the book we saw. And finally, Indian architecture through multiple sources. Most important of them is the Jaipur portfolio. All those five sources were like put together and then republished in general publication like the Grammar of Ornament and the Polychrome Ornament. So Sullivan probably had publications like those, who were many of them in 18th century, better or worse quality. I mean, the Grammar of Ornament and the Ornament Polychrome, they are like the best of their type, and that's why they have surpassed history. But there are a lot of them, and a lot of in-betweens books about Alhambra, about Moorish architecture, etc. So that's basically the source that Sullivan probably had to do all the designs, plus his own inventive. Because also you need to consider that when you are, at least in the past, when you were in the cultural periphery, the architecture was always more original because you didn't have all the information. You had to figure out a lot of things. And if you were good enough, you would probably do pretty good stuff. So I'm not putting only Sullivan, I'm putting also all the Barroco Nuevo Hispano, all the Mexican Baroque, that had much more freedom than the Peruvian one because it wasn't so bounded by earthquakes. So not that there are no earthquakes in Mexico, but there are much less than in Peru. Or then all the production of Robert Adam in Scotland, very interesting. And Robert Adam in general, all his architecture is much more interesting than others. Why? Because he was learning on his own there in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, or Ledoux. Ledoux was from Burgundy, By the time he becomes like a famous architect, he is he has developed his own idea. So the cultural periphery is having very important. Or Gaudí. If Gaudí was living in Madrid, he wouldn't have done what he did because he would have done more academic architecture. One thing I don't understand is how the Europeans can enjoy similar architectural fundamentals like how the column, Doric, Ionic, etc., but the Islamic world can't really do the same. Well, they did. Islamic architecture did. It just developed their own variations of the orders that change it over the time. So think the same thing that in medieval architecture, most of the Gothic capitals, I would say that all the capitals in Gothic architecture are Corinthian capitals. They are variations of the Corinthian capital. And we call them Gothic, but they're Corinthian. So in Islamic architecture happens something similar. I mean, you have all this abstraction process of converting the natural motifs and the vegetal motifs into abstract geometry, and then from there it keeps evolving because I always say this is a bit like when you play Chinese whispers. No, the final sentences might not be the same as the beginning one, but this is how you are working. And also remember that in Western Europe, we came back to classicism because Vitruvius was rediscovered, and Vitruvius supposed like an anchor point of all the different classical traditions that we had. Because if you see, for example, the first Brunelleschi, when he started building classical, he's trying to figure out a lot of problems that you cannot get in the monuments of antiquity. Vitruvius wasn't officially discovered. Alberti has the same problem. They have to figure out what to do. Alberti then, it's slightly later, then he knows about Vitruvius, he writes his book. But when you see, for example, the Sacristia Nuova, the Sacristia Vecchia in Florence or the Capilla Pazzi, you find that Brunelleschi was struggling to find a solution with the corners. And that is because it was the first time in 1500 centuries, in 1500 years, sorry, that someone was trying to solve a Corinthian cornice. So I think that's a bit the issue. So I have to admit the feeding of Amar's comment and the lack of an Arabic Vitruvius. Is there still potential for someone to create standardized architectural canon for the region? I think it is, but I think that clash. I mean, I think that for a region, I think that regional canons are there. I think that you can, for example, you can create a canon for the Nasrid capital in Alhambra, because there is the canon there. You can also trace a canon for the Caliphal capitals in the Mosque of Cordoba, because actually in the Mosque of Cordoba, we will see that when we talk about it, the first extension is done with capitals taken from Roman ruins. The second extension, well, the first and the second extensions are done with capitals taken from Roman ruins. The third extension is done with new capitals, or so, let's say mix of both of new and old capitals. Some of the capitals are new, very well carved. Same as you see the chapel in Aachen. A lot of those Corinthian capitals, they are like reproductions. I mean, they were done by Carolingians, they were done by caliphs. And then when Almanzor does the final extension, he creates his own order. So you can't say that there is a specific Almanzor order in the Mosque of Cordoba, which is the one in his extension, because all of them are the same. So there wasn't a standardization, even if we cannot document who did the standardization. Someone sat down and then all the capitals are going to be like this. Same way that if you go to Medina Sahara, all the capitals, all the bases are the same. So there is a standardization. Pietro Montani and Victor Marie Launay did the same with Ottoman architecture. They extracted the principles and then they did. Or for example, I have one here. It's not specific about Indian, Mughal Indian, and the capital is totally misleading. It's called The Elements of Indian Architecture by José Pereira. So it's a Portuguese that was living in Goa. So this book is from the 60s, and he talks about orders in Indian architecture. The problem is that he's a bit obsessed in trying to have 5 orders. But he actually creates illustrations like this with the orders of Indian architecture. So it's a very interesting book on that regard, because he's trying to put the Indian architecture into in an orderly way. Whether he manages to do it or not, he doesn't much. It's a bit clumsy, but it's a good attempt. It's a very good attempt to do it. This on the other side, which is Indian architecture. So this is just a survey of Indian buildings. So then here you just see the elevation and then extract the prints, do whatever you want with them. So there is a lot of in between. So here, this book is not telling you anything about composition in Indian architecture. It's telling you these are Indian buildings, but it is a good survey. Same thing as the Jaipur portfolio. So I think that that's a bit the difference. I mean, you could have a canon, you could have it, but I think that by the time that people were actually interested in investigating about those canons, modernism and the modernist mindset had eliminated the need of having them. I think that's the problem. Because why are you interested in the module? Because I remember when I have been talking about this with my professors, they all were like, but why modulation? Why this? Why are you so interested in that? It doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. Because they basically they don't want to understand, or they don't need, or they find that it's pointless to understand those composition, those geometry, because you are not going to use them. For them, it's useless. So it's good that you identify, it's good that you do, it's good that you restore, it's good that you're good at restoring it, but it's pointless for you to learn how that was composed, because what are you going to do? Are you intending to use it? Are you a pastiche architect? So I think that's a bit the problem. Sorry, Miguel, what did you want to say?
No worries. Just adding on to because I always find it very interesting that this argument is very common. Do you, and it's more a, I don't know, psychological, philosophical question. Do you think people oftentimes fear learning the truth and they willingly are ignorant because knowing that learning the truth can maybe not give them justification anymore to not do certain things or to do certain things? As if, for
Um,
example, a modernist, for example, who says, "Oh, why do you look into that? Um, don't look into it, because then maybe if you read it, you'll have justification to do the opposite of what they want."
I wouldn't. I would say that the modernist mindset doesn't need to get there. The answer is no. Period. You don't do it. It doesn't matter that if you even if you can justify that this is how they do it and you're doing historically accurate, they're still going to tell you that you're doing a pastiche. So it doesn't matter. So if someone investigated, they would consider this academic curiosity and academic rarity. It will be appreciated as an academic rarity. The moment it goes from that academic rarity into something to be used to design new things, it automatically falls into the category of pastiche. That's the problem. So that no, not the problem. I mean, the modernist isn't going to care if you're right or not, because in his mindset you're always wrong. Anything that is not going through the modernist path is wrong. Period. So I would say that there is no fear. The fear is that you do it, but whether you do it good or you do it wrong, they're going to hate it anyways. And whether and that would be my conclusion. It's all you are wrong basically. You if you want to do it, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can study it. I mean, they will tell you no because they know or they assume what comes after, and basically they don't want you to do it. But if you do it, they're not going to be. Their fear is going to be, oh, here comes another pastiche, and for them it's going to be for them you are going to be. So for them, let's say that the guy in the Middle East that is doing classico, as the Portuguese say, no, is that horrible bad version of classical is the same as someone doing extremely well. Rafael Manzano and Abdel Wakel and whoever did the Opera of Oman and the Great Mosque of Dubai, all of them are equal pastiches, equally bad quality than the Habibi that doesn't stop putting plasterwork and moldings in his house. So that's what the bottom is. So if you are using something that looks remotely past, you're a pastiche. Whether you do good or wrong, I don't care. If you're telling me that you have spent 20 years of your life researching on how the exact way of doing this, I don't care. You could have downloaded a block from AutoCAD because I'm treating you, I'm going to treat both of you the same way. I think that's the difference. There is no fear because you're wrong anyway. Whatever you do, you're wrong. Sorry, Amar. Sorry, what did you say? What sorry, you raised your hand. Tell me.
Uh, no need to say sorry. I'm just waiting for my turn. That's all. My question for you was sometimes we have this chat in, let's say, my circles at least, and the chat is regarding how can Bahrain, let's say from my point of view, at least my area of the world, living in Bahrain, we tend to have a lot of arguments and like discussion about how we can continue building traditional, but then evolve it similar to how we have, let's say, Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, XYZ. And my question for you is, since we have the golden age with Baghdad, and then we had the another golden age, let's say with the Umayyads in Damascus and whatnot, what's the exact blueprint for us in Bahrain, or let's say the Islamic world, to have a renaissance? Because even though knowledge is very much in our fingertips now, one Google search away from like information, we don't really have that like the exact blueprint figured out exactly how to have a renaissance in Bahrain when it comes to, let's say, architecture, art, all that stuff. So any recommendations, let's say from a historical point of view, to have a renaissance?
That's very interesting what you are questioning because I think that the difference is that the Islamic world is much more, even if it starts as the Ummah, it starts as a brotherhood, because it doesn't have an original, the Arab world doesn't have an original tradition, they need to adapt different traditions. And by the moment it's adapting the different traditions, it's adapting the different traditions in a world that is collapsing or has already collapsed from the Roman Empire. Then they cannot all have an universal tradition because the tradition has already collapsed where they are installing. So then, I mean, if you're telling me which, let's say you have mentioned Baghdad, no, but if you're telling me which is the golden age of Islam in Spain, that would be the Umayyads. But some people will say the Alhambra. Well, the Alhambra was actually a very corrupt state, overpopulated, and just was a giant in mud food, but it was producing very pretty architecture. So I would that's it. What do you put the point in a very long and varied history that didn't have that the only moment they were united was at the very beginning, and then after the Umayyads it collapsed, no, because the reason why everything just started dividing is because the Umayyads were accepted by everyone, but then the Abbasids were not. And then you would say, on top of that, you have mentioned the Abbasids and Baghdad. Would the Turkish accept Baghdad as the peak while they have Sinan? Would the Egyptians accept Baghdad while they have all the Mamluk architecture? Would Syria or Arabia accept the Iraqi architecture? Definitely, I'm not going to accept the Ottoman, that's for sure. But where do you put the point? And I think that you need to put the point locally. So I would say if you're going for Spain, the peak would be the Alhambra because it's the last building, it's the most elaborate ones. Although I would say that the Alcazar of Sevilla would be the actual peak point, the actual point of spread is in the Alcazar of Sevilla and not in the Alhambra, despite the Alhambra being super beautiful. Why? Because the Alcazar of Sevilla was as a building, as an influence, could have much more extended influence than the Alhambra. You go to the Ottoman Empire, and it's basically Byzantine architecture converted into Ottoman through Sinan. So a renaissance in Ottoman architecture goes through Sinan, period. So, but you as a Bahraini, do you actually need to learn Sinan and Byzantine and this neo-Byzantine architecture that Sinan is doing? No, you need to go more for the reference that you have in Bahrain that are like sort of in a triangle between Abbasid Iraqi, Safavid Persian, and then Arab, and then the Persian Gulf tradition in general. No, the little traditions that you have there that are like very simplified versions of what is happening in Iraq and Syria. But a little hint of Ottoman because you cannot deny it. But yeah, but everyone hates the Ottomans. So except in the Turkish. Sorry, I don't know if we have Turkish here, but I mean I think that general the impression is that once everyone got independent from the Ottoman Empire, no one wants to look to the Ottoman. So I think that basically you need to work at two levels. One is work with what you have in Bahrain, the very little or very much traditional Bahraini architecture that you have there, whatever you have there, whatever that is, that's your base point. And then keep expanding your circle until you find something that talks to you. So what does that mean? That obviously the traditional Bahraini architecture has the limitation that it has because it was an architecture, but same thing as traditional Spanish architecture. I mean, the moment that we all have bathrooms and TVs, all our traditional architecture, all traditional interior distribution, etc., all that disappears because we have two elements that we didn't have before. All the rest of the elements can be translated and accommodated, but you have to rethink everything about the bathroom because bathrooms didn't exist in the past, and you have to think everything about a TV because rooms were not organized around the TV. Rooms were organized, all the living rooms, sitting rooms were organized to look at each other. Think about any majlis. Traditional majlis, everyone looks at each other, or maybe they're looking at the entrance for obvious reason to see who comes in and out for controlling. Think about the majlis, for example. No, I mean, I'm not going through interiors, but that's the thing. I mean, I think that the Arab world, more or less, you keep you at least in the projects that they do that obviously are too big, you keep the majlis and the TV room separate. So and that is like where the influence starts and leaves. But I would say that you go to the present that you have there, and then that's your core point, and then you start moving, expanding the circle in stages. So, for example, if Bahrain has traditional, if the links of Bahrain, the architectural links of Bahrain are probably more Persian than Arab, and correct me if I am wrong, then you will have to look at Persia for more references. You're not going to be looking at Syria. You might have to be looking at Safavid Persia. But definitely you're not going to look at Mughal India. You're not going to look at Ottoman Turkey. Maybe there is a relationship with Mamluk Egypt. I mean, I'm not so well versed on Bahraini architecture. But this is the cultural links that you need to find when your own local links don't work. So, for example, I mean, if you're in UK and you want to design Georgian architecture, you have a lot. You don't need to go to the continent to bring something else. Indeed, when in UK bring something from the continent, it's actually genuinely French looking. It's French paneling, French boiserie, extremely ornated in the French style. You're not looking for something another. You're literally importing it. So I think that probably the attitude is a bit like that. You have your Bahraini architecture, traditional Bahraini architecture, the example that you have, and it is what it is. If you want to go bigger, you start looking around until you reach a point in which actually you find what you want. And then you can always go to, for example, I mean, I know that we have talked a lot about Haussmannian Paris. You cannot just build Haussmannian Paris in Bahrain, but you can take the idea of the Haussmannian structures and then adapt them with motifs and a framework inspired in Bahraini architecture. Not because just because the Bahraini house probably had one ground plus one story means that everything in Bahrain has to be one story, and anything above one story has to be a glass skyscraper. There is a big in between, but that's what I would say. No, I mean, for example, when I was in Doha last autumn, I mean, I went to there were two big shopping malls, plus the Dome, which was horrible. Um, a very bad imitation of Paris, and then it was Lafayette, but it was a very, very nice imitation of Palladio. Very well done. But if you tell me what's the better, the souk was much better done. and that is what I would say. I mean, to me, the souk, which is new, the souk is completely new, the souk of Doha. It was very well done, very nicely done, and that's I would set the standard. Now, again, if we're inspired, if we're getting inspired in architecture that is maximum 2 or 3 stories tall, we have a limitation, and there is only a certain amount of volume that we can grow before having to look for something else. And then is when you go to the next step. And I would say that in your case, in the Bahraini case, your limits or the maximum of your reach on which or the farthest you can go to find what you want would be Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. Those are those a line connecting those cities would be the limits or the symbolic limits of where it would go. Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran. Those are the limits in which I would be looking for whatever you cannot get from there. You don't need to go to, you definitely don't need to go to Turkey. Definitely, I don't think you need to go to Egypt, but Jordan is a good Jordan could be a good point as well. Jordan, Lebanon. I say Lebanon because Beirut has a very interesting urban development by the French that is very well adapted to the Levant. It's not like Algiers, which is basically a copy of Paris in the south, in North Africa. Lebanon is a proper adaptation of Osmanian urbanism to the Middle East reality. So Beirut is a place where you can learn from in terms of urban design.
Uh,
And of
If
course,
I could just slowly interject.
yeah,
One small thing I wanted to mention, I think I've reached the limit now that I'm done looking at let's say my national architecture, and I'm looking outward now. And I've noticed a lot of like you said, basically, my limits are, I think, Iran, maybe parts of Afghanistan, Iraq, quite a lot actually, Syria, Jordan, the Levant, those areas, even Egypt to a degree.
yeah,
And one thing I noticed that whatever we're missing here somewhere else. So, for example, the other day I went to a fort and I noticed the arches looked very similar to the Mosque of Cordoba. Those arches, the very ornate circular arches. And I was like thinking, that's very interesting. I've never seen this arch in all of Bahrain. And then I was looking at some picture of my friend from Saudi, and he showed me a souk in a place called Al Ahsa, and it has the same exact shape. So I'm thinking, okay, so wherever we do miss here and there, we can just take anywhere, even the columns. Most of the columns are shaped. We don't really have columns in Bahrain,
yeah,
and if we do, it's a square with the corners cut. If you want, you can look up, let's say,
yeah.
a tulip column, which is basically Persian. And I'm thinking, wow, that's so cool that we can take different elements. And I think now the chat right now in Bahrain is what can we take from Iran, from Egypt, from almost anywhere in the Islamic world. So I think for us the criteria is if it's Islamic, can we take it? Like Turkey, but I'm thinking, why not? If I want a cool column, maybe Turkey can do the job, like a Makarna column. I feel like we can take any part of the Islamic world, even like our minarets. Our minarets in Uzbekistan looks very nice. I think it can fit in here pretty well, actually. Yeah.
I mean, I think you are right. I mean, I think, for example, that this thing that you're mentioning about the bicolored arches in the Mosque of Cordoba. I'm bringing this last image because this is the connection that we were talking in the first class about all the connections of Islamic architecture, understood like a tube map. And you can trace a line that connects Cordoba with Tehran, and then the information flows both sides. Because remember that in Syria, the Abbasids do what they do with the Umayyads, and then Abdurrahman goes to Cordoba, but then he becomes a very powerful caliph at the same level because initially he goes and becomes an emir, but then he becomes a caliph. So when he becomes a caliph, he's equal to all the other caliphs. So that means that, and because of Al Andalus richness, he can export that architecture to the Middle East because people will go there, will get amazed, and then will see that. And also because of the influence, because of the real powerful influence of the Cordoba horseshoe arch, that has become a symbol of Islamic architecture in itself that has been adopted in areas where they don't have a tradition. Mostly, all the new developments around Arabia, which were not controlled by the Ottomans, which were tribes until very recently. So that is because it's imagine, I mean, we're talking about people who were villagers 50 years ago, and the image that they had was the popular imaginary. So that's also something to consider. I think that what you are saying, I think we need to make the difference in what it is possible and what you consider it can be appropriate. Because possible can be anything. You can get the Big Bang, put it in Muharrak, and put it as a minaret. Because why not? You can get the Giralda and put it there. The Giralda was a minaret straight away. So, or you can get the minaret of the belfry of the Mosque of Cordoba as it is now, knowing that there is a minaret inside, and put it. Is it possible? Yes. Does it match with what you have in Bahrain? Do you want it to match? Those are the questions that I would ask myself. No, it's like, for example, I mean, it's modernist building, but it's not so bad, or certain parts of it aren't so bad. The Museum of Islamic Culture in Doha by Cesar Pelli, if you don't see the turret that they have in the center and you omit completely the inside, it's not bad. I mean, with that arcades welcoming you, etc. Is that appropriate? I think it is. But for example, I would say that both Place Vendôme and Lafayette are not appropriate at all for Qatar. It's just like something imported. Does it look good? Yes, it does. So I think that there is like the possible, the suitable, or and the good, because a modernist thing might be possible, might not look suitable, but it's still good because it's good in the sense that it's providing a service to the community. Something Gothic is good, not appropriate, but you see what I mean. But then maybe you do something totally inspired in traditional Bahraini architecture, is appropriate, but it's not good because it doesn't fulfill the purpose. So I think that's what the balance strikes, and I think that yeah, everything is possible. I always say the thing, everything is possible in Granada, but that doesn't mean that you should do it. So I think that you have to consider the difference between what is possible and what is appropriate. That's what I would. That's how I would put the difference. So that's what I was saying, that I wouldn't feel appropriate Ottoman minarets or Central Asia minarets because, and again, I mean, I'm talking from my lack of knowledge on Bahraini architecture, because probably you have closer examples to use. For example, all the Safavid architecture, all the Iraqi architecture, Jordanian architecture. So probably to me, I would say, look at the Citadel of Amman, look at the palaces in the desert. You might find something more interesting. You don't need to go to Istanbul or to Samarkand to find what you need. It's basically that. So it's like you can, to if you want to buy some food, you can get the car, go to the supermarket and buy it, or you can go to the local shop and they might still have it. So in both cases, you have got meat. That's what I mean. We have two more comments here. Okay, these are Jews. So yeah, the Arabian Peninsula was just nomadic until a century, and for example, Dubai, I think, and probably Dubai, Qatar, and probably Bahrain, they were all struggling because they were just trading pearls. And then when the Japanese discovered the synthetic pearls, it was a total disaster for all those societies. I mean, it was just a miracle that very soon after the discovery of the synthetic pearls, oil was discovered, because it was having a disaster for all the countries there, because they were in a crisis, because they had only two sources, fish and pearls. So it was very, very providential that there was a lot of oil for those countries, because they lost the only source of income, which was the pearls, because there is fish everywhere. Okay, so now you have diamonds. Even better. I didn't know that there are diamonds in. So that's really great.
No,
Because
no, that was a joke. That was a joke. I meant like,
okay. No,
we
but
we found pearls after pearls, oil after oil, maybe diamonds. You never know. Our luck is, great in this peninsula.
or plutonium, which is not a bad idea either. But no, no,
Yeah,
but
hope
but
so.
that is what I mean. It was very providential that oil was discovered there because, for example, UK and Norway discovered oil, but neither of them needed the oil, if you know what I mean. While the countries in the Persian Gulf really needed the oil at the moment. Whether now we can criticize that there has been a lot of excess, etc., which is a separate debate. Before the discovery of the oil, the situation was very critical for those countries. Oh, let's see the arch that you sent to the group. Oh, there has been like someone has been showing something about the city palace. Oh, that's a very interesting arch. That's a very interesting art that you have sent in the group. Very interesting because let's see if I can share it. Let's see if I can. Let's share the art because it's very, very interesting. Oops, this is not. This is a very, very interesting arch because normally when you have all this type of multifoil arches, you would have you would have one multifoil here. Actually, this peak here is very interesting because it's actually putting the whole arch into a conceptual danger because this is opening the arch. Obviously, you can very clearly see here that you have the discharge arch is happening here. You can see the with a slight difference in the humidity and the plaster. So this arch is decorative; it's not supporting anything. There is another arch on top, but it still is very interesting because normally you would normally have one arch here and then the rest would just follow. But you should have one so that the loads are transmitted smoothly. Here you are just breaking them. You are sending them horizontally. So it's very, very interesting. The concept, which at the end of the day is telling us that the arch is fake and that there is something above solving the transmission of charges, but very, very interesting arch. Very, very interesting. So we have here another comment. Christian was saying, which book are good for Gothic details? I'm working with Collegiate Gothic. I remember, I mean, it's a bit tangential, but the Indiana Limestone Institute has a very, very good section on Tudor, Gothic Tudor details that is very good. I would say because you're going for collegiate Gothic, so I think that proper Gothic, it's a bit too much. So you need to go for Tudor, build the Tudor books. I will find them and send you in the library section because I might have them somewhere. Because when I was doing the project in Scotland, I went through a lot of Tudor architecture. But yeah, you need to go for more Tudor. Ah, yes, I have one here. It's very tangential, but Dimitri Porphyrios has did a lot of collegiate buildings in Oxford. And if you check the books, which I'm sure that they have them in Notre Dame, they have very good elevations. Any book by Dimitri Porphyrios will have them. So it's not directly Gothic, and it doesn't tell you the sources because this is unofficial, but they just got them from observation, as anyone would do anyway. So it's very interesting. But Dimitri Porphyrios has very interesting books, very interesting projects on collegiate Gothic, which I recommend you to take a look. And then Robert Stern, but I think that what you're looking for is more. Um, I wouldn't definitely tell you to go to what was this name. It should have the Gothic one there. The Gothic. Gothic. Ah, yes. This one, the no, I don't know because I mean I assume that they are asking you for a very academic, so don't go for the for Batty Langley's Gothic with CK. I think that will be too fanciful. I think that if you go for the books on the Indiana Limestone Institute, you will get very, very good details. And there is a couple of books. If you check Tudor architecture in archive.org, you will get them. You will get quite good ones. I have this one, but this is, sorry, this is proper Gothic. This is Cavalier, so from 1839. William Cavalier Allerley is selected specimens of Gothic architecture. But as you see, I mean, this is proper Gothic. Yeah, this is proper Gothic. So it's very good, but I think that the direction you are pointing out is a totally different one that Gothic cannot, that proper Gothic cannot give you. So check those ones. Check. I will send you in the library link. You have Gothic moldings and theory of moldings, but again, they are very much into the detail. Pugin has a couple of books on Gothic, but they are more Tudor. Um, there is a survey of Bromley Palace that you can use as well. Ah, yes, and the Boston Architectural Club. Yes, yes. Is it 1928 or is it 19? Yes, the Boston Architectural Club of 1928 has a very good collection of Tudor architecture. There you go. Yeah, I think that this one still Gothic-y, but has some. So I remember having used this one for the one in Scotland. Yes, you see, it has some Tudor vernacular, but also has somewhere it has like a bit more of Tudor. Yes. So this one, I think it's a good one. Boston Architectural Club, the Book of Boston Architectural Club for 1928. So I think that this one you might find it interesting. But check archive.org because I remember having seen the good ones there. Dimitri Porphyrios, he has some good stuff. Robert, I understand, but I think that if you're looking for proper surveys and elevations, the Indiana Limestone Institute has very good ones with full geometry and details that are also interesting. Any more questions? Well, I know. I mean, I have been publishing that on the groups. There is this week at the end of the week there is a congress Tuesday and Thursday and Friday in Madrid on modern classicism from Fundación Culturas Constructivas. It's free to watch them, so if you can go and register and attend it, it will be very good. I will be speaking. I will be the last speaker talking about classical survivalist in mid 20th century. And there is other very interesting one. Robert Adam is talking. There is very, very good one lectures, which I recommend you to take a look at them. And once they will be published on YouTube, I will also let you know. And then yeah, so our next class will be in 2 weeks, and we will be talking about Umayyads and Abbasids. So to set up the foundational basis for all the future architecture we're going to see in Cordoba, Granada, and Sevilla, and the rest of Spain with Zaragoza and the others, and Malaga, and many others. So yeah, until then, have a lovely rest of the day, lovely Sunday, lovely beginning of the week, good starting of the Ramadan for those of you, because Ramadan starts on Tuesday, doesn't it? I think it's Tuesday. Yes, Wednesday. Yeah, because I know that we were expecting client meetings, and we know that they're not going to happen until a month time. It's too late. It's too late. No one is going to meet just before Ramadan. So yeah, but until then, have oh yeah. I mean, poor you guys. I mean, I don't like working with Middle East people during Ramadan because either you're zombies or you are like you want to kill everyone, which is normal anyway, or both. You're zombies that want to kill everyone. It's a bit hard for you to work on during Ramadan, but at least it's not very hot. I guess that if it happens in proper summer, it's like horrible because you cannot drink water either. But anyway, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a lovely time, and see you soon. If I don't, I hope that you see me and the others on Thursday and Friday. It's going to be worth. But if not, I'll see you when I see you. See you in 2 weeks. Bye bye.